Second reading of the Zimbabwe Bill. The Lord Garner.
My Lords, I rise to move that this bill be now read a second time. And, my Lords, the first thing I have to tell your Lordships is that I have it in command of Her Majesty the Queen to acquaint your Lordships that Her Majesty, having been informed of the purpose of the Zimbabwe Bill, has consented to place her royal prerogative and interest, so far as they are affected by the bill, at the disposal of Parliament. My Lords, the bill itself contains a number of technically complicated provisions, but it is not for this reason that my noble friend the Foreign Secretary thought that in the unavoidable absence of himself and of the Leader of the House, it was a courtesy to the House that the one remaining available member of the Cabinet should move the second reading of this piece of legislation, which may indeed be a historic piece of legislation. I'm sorry, and I think we're all sorry, that it's been necessary to compress the parliamentary timetable for its passing. But in another place, the opposition were good enough to understand the reasons for this, and we were grateful to them there. I'm given by my noble friends to understand that in this House the opposition intends to be equally accommodating. My Lords, we acknowledge and are grateful for their public spirit in this matter. My Lords, the whole good faith of Her Majesty's government, and therefore of Britain, depends upon placing this bill speedily upon the statute book. It is essential that the Independence Bill should pass before the actual occurrence of independence, so that elections may be held before Independence Day, and all affected by the granting of independence, particularly individuals, should know in advance the arrangements to be made. My Lords, for 14 years now, Rhodesia has been living in a state of illegality, of defiance of lawful authority. There is scarcely a person in any party in this country who did not deplore the universal declaration, the unilateral declaration of independence when it was made. And certainly no one with any influence in my own party who did not use that influence against it being made. My Lords, it was against the grain of history, and contrary to the whole movement of British policy since the war. Worse than this, by defying lawful authority, the regime in Rhodesia made it difficult or impossible for Britain, and we don't yet quite know which, but difficult at least, and possibly impossible, to help them and their country out of the impasse they had created for themselves. Since then, every party in the whole House, in every part of it, has striven to the best of their ability to put an end to the state of illegality and to create conditions in which Rhodesia could be brought to legal independence. It's one chance, as all of us believe, of peaceful stability, upon which the happiness and fortunes of all its inhabitants can be seen to depend. That has been the aim of us all throughout, although about the means we may have been in a state of difference with one another. The negotiations of the past 14 weeks have at last resolved the main political difficulties which stood in the way. This involved compromise between both sides in the negotiation, and I know my noble friend would wish me to pay tribute to both sides in those negotiations for their readiness to make the necessary compromises. But an essential condition throughout has been a return to legality. It has been recognized by the international community throughout that it was the responsibility of Great Britain, it was the responsibility of Her Majesty's government to secure this return to legality. That was recognized by the Commonwealth at Lusaka, and it has been accepted by Her Majesty's government and by the parties to the negotiations. My lords, that is why the negotiations have taken place here at Lancaster House. That is why my noble friend has chaired the conference, and the House will perhaps forgive me if I pay shortly my own tribute to my noble friend for the enormous public service he has performed in doing so. My lords, in addition to the immense burdens which inescapably attend the office of Foreign Secretary, he has risked his health and almost worn himself to a standstill in the cause of peace. He's been patient in the face of frustration, courteous in the face of discourtesy, helpful in the face of discouragement, firm without being precipitate in the face of vacillation. And now, my lords, we hope that his efforts, all our efforts, are almost within sight of success. The main political issues have been resolved, and only details remain to be settled. My lords, the first stage was, of course, to agree and then to enact the Constitution. The summary was agreed between the parties in October. The full text, available to your lordship, has been enacted by order in council. It achieves full majority rule. Full majority rule both in the administration and in the legislature. It provides safeguards, persuasive and entrenched, for the minority community. Safeguards, but not privileges, entrenched, but not with blocking powers. Let us hope that they will prove sufficient for them to remain and to make their own distinctive and substantial contribution to the prosperity and security of the new state. My lords, the next step was to secure the agreement of the parties to accept the authority of the governor in the transitional period prior to independence. This was necessary in order to achieve a return to legality. That was no mean achievement, because your lordships will remember that never had Rhodesia had a governor with full powers as Lord Soames has. Your lordships will remember the special position of Rhodesia ever since 1923. But the governor's presence is essential in order to give confidence to both sides and secure that there should be an impartial administration and an impartial organization of elections. The House has already wished my noble friend and Lady Soames Godspeed and success in discharging their responsibilities. My lords, as I've said, my noble friend Lord Soames's task is to assume administrative power prior to the elections and to organize and supervise the elections under the authority of Her Majesty's government. That was agreed at Lancaster House, and it had previously been agreed at Lusaka. The elections will be held under British authority. All parties have agreed to campaign peacefully, and all parties have agreed to accept the results. Independence will be conferred on whatever government emerges as the result. The detailed arrangements for the elections have also been agreed at Lancaster House, and the legislative steps have been taken here by order in council and in Rhodesia by governor's ordinance. My lords, the dispatch of the governor and the introduction of this bill this afternoon are closely related to one another. Taken together, they enable us to do what the international community has constantly urged upon us as our responsibility. But, of course, there can be no question of our accepting an open-ended responsibility, an open-ended commitment. Our purpose is to organize elections in which all parties can participate equally. Our one remaining responsibility will end when that purpose is achieved and the constitutional formalities completed. In our view, that should not last more than 3 months. We are taking this action to discharge our remaining responsibility and to bring it to an end, and not to prolong it. My lords, this was well put by my noble friend Lord Soames in his inaugural address to the people of Rhodesia, when he said, and I quote him, "My aim is to work with you for a better and more peaceful future for all the people of this country. My task is to hold the government of the country in trust, while the political leaders of all parties put their case to you. As soon as you've made your choice, I shall hand over my powers to the government which you elect and return to London. Your country will then become legally independent. This is an irreversible process." My lords, with my noble friend's arrival as governor, Rhodesia has been restored to legality. Our permanent representative at the United Nations has informed the President of the Security Council that the situation which led to the imposition of sanctions no longer exists. The United States and New Zealand have already followed our example in lifting sanctions. The government hope and assume that others will do so very shortly. My lords, the third and final task of the conference was to secure agreement on a ceasefire. Agreement has been reached on the government's proposals for a ceasefire. These offer security to the forces of both sides and enable them to be effectively monitored. The Salisbury delegation have subsequently accepted further proposals for the detailed implementation of the ceasefire. Discussions continue with the Patriotic Front. We've told the Patriotic Front that if their forces assemble with their arms and equipment in numbers greater than can be dealt with at the assembly places designated in the ceasefire agreement, the government will assess the need for additional sites in relation to the successful accomplishment of the assembly process by the Patriotic Front forces and in relation to the disposition of their forces. The government also recognized that the Patriotic Front had got a practical problem in one particular area and have agreed to provide a further assembly point. We hope that with these additional assurances, the Patriotic Front will now also initial the agreement. The conference has now concluded its work, and the final documents are now ready for signature. They have already been initialed by the Salisbury delegation and by Her Majesty's government. The Patriotic Front must now take the crucial political decision whether to put its support to the test of elections rather than continue the war. When so much has been achieved, when the basic causes of the conflict in Rhodesia have been removed, It would indeed be a tragedy if the Patriotic Front were to refuse a peaceful settlement at this last moment. The government hope profoundly that they'll agree to participate in elections. I don't believe a refusal to do so would have international support. Nor can the government keep open the date of elections indefinitely while the Patriotic Front make up their minds. The Zimbabwe Bill, now before your lordships, will enable the government finally to discharge Britain's responsibility. As I've said, I regret the compression of the parliamentary timetable and am grateful to the opposition for their understanding and consideration in this matter. But the passage of the bill is for the parties to the conference a crucial test of the government's good faith. We've been able to persuade them to make concessions. In many cases, they've been very difficult concessions by assuring them that the result will be independence for their country. We can't hold a sword of Damocles over the country by leaving that issue in doubt. The parties have agreed to abide by the agreement, and now we must show our good faith in return. It's also important that arrangements to be made on independence should be known well in advance to those, particularly those individuals who may be affected by them. My lords, I now turn to the legislative provisions of the bill. Clause 1 establishes a new independent Republic of Zimbabwe, and upon independence terminates the responsibility of the Parliament and Government of the United Kingdom for Southern Rhodesia. In the bill, no date is set for independence. This will be determined by order in council. It may well not be possible to set the date until a late stage in the interim period. That will be for the governor to decide in the form of a recommendation. The government don't propose that the order setting the date of independence be subject to further parliamentary procedure. There is nothing more that the government intend to ask of the parties to the conference as a condition of independence. The certainty that independence will follow, if the agreements are reached at Lancaster House are honoured, will be a strong incentive in the interim period for both parties to carry them out in full. So far as the parties to the conference are concerned, the final hurdle is the agreement at the conference. We cannot allow further obstacles now to be added. The government have undertaken to ensure that the coming elections are fair. Observers will be present from the Commonwealth and from other countries to see that they are fair. But it is the British government's responsibility to bring Rhodesia to legal independence, and the basis on which we shall do so is the agreement reached at the conference. My lords, most of the remaining clauses are technical, but they must be summarised, even though I shall attempt to do so briefly. First of all, membership of the Commonwealth. In most, though not in all previous cases, membership of the Commonwealth was discussed prior to independence. In this case, the question must be decided and will be decided by the newly elected government when it comes. Thus, since the processes of consultation will need time, the bill assumes that independence will occur outside the Commonwealth and contains provisions to deal with this, particularly in order to avoid an abrupt change of status for individuals. I need hardly add, my lords, that if the future elected government of Zimbabwe decides to seek Commonwealth membership, Her Majesty's government will give the application their warm support. My lord, the next question to be dealt with is citizenship and nationality. There are, we believe, some 80,000 I should say that this I'm referring now to Clause 2 of the bill. There are some 80,000 Rhodesians who are also citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies. They have this status quite independently of their relationship and connection with Rhodesia, usually because they were born in this country. And the position of these 80,000 will not change on independence. In addition to these, we estimate that there are some 70,000 citizens of Rhodesia who have a right of abode here under existing law because at present they are Commonwealth citizens. These would automatically lose their right of abode when Rhodesia came to independence outside the Commonwealth, unless some transitional provision were made, and that is what we are doing. Since the government believe that Zimbabwe may well join the Commonwealth within 1 year, it would not be fair to change abruptly the position of this second group of 70,000 persons. Schedule 2, subclause 7 of the bill, therefore preserves their right of abode for 1 year. If at the end of that period of a year, Zimbabwe has not joined the Commonwealth, then that right of abode will be lost. My Lords, there are 2 further transitional provisions for citizenship. Rhodesians who are already in this country and who have an entitlement to registration as citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies will have a further 12 months after independence within which to apply. That is contained in Schedule 2, paragraph 2. It applies only to persons who've already been in this country for some years. Then, my Lords, there is a very narrow category of Rhodesians who were British subjects before the 1st of January 1949, with a United Kingdom-born ancestor in the male line and other close connections with the United Kingdom. These too will also have a further right for a further 12 months, in which they will be eligible to apply for registration as citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies if they intend to take up residence here. But I should make it clear that in this case there is no automatic entitlement to registration. It will be at the discretion of the Home Secretary. I can therefore give your Lordships 2 assurances. First, the bill does not create any new citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies. Secondly, the bill does not give rise to any significant new immigration commitment. The persons affected by the transitional registration provisions, which I've described, will amount at most to a few hundred. My Lords, since we are moving from illegality to legality and from a state of war to peace, it is clear that there must be an amnesty. Amnesty is a word of Greek derivation. It means that if you want peace, you must learn to forget the past on both sides. So be it. Clause 3 deals with the amnesty according to the law of the United Kingdom. The details of the acts covered, both in furtherance of the unilateral declaration of independence and resistance to it, are set out in Clause 3, subclause 2. There will also be an amnesty under Rhodesian law. That is an amnesty different from that which I have just described in Clause 3 of the bill, and that will be made under Section 3 of the Southern Rhodesian Act of 1973. In reply to a question from the noble and learned Lord Elwyn Jones on the 29th of November, My noble friend, the Foreign Secretary, promised to inform the House of the government's intentions before any action was taken about Rhodesian law, and the government hoped to be in a position to make a statement on that shortly. My Lords, it has long been recognised on both sides of your Lordship's House that an amnesty will be required to draw a line under the past in Rhodesia and allow a fresh start to be made. It's appropriate that that amnesty should extend to the law of the United Kingdom too, so that those concerned with the unfortunate events of the past can travel here without fear of prosecution. If we can lift the burden of the past, the task of building a future Zimbabwe on a foundation of reconciliation and unity will be eased. We must use the opportunity, too, to wipe the slate clear in our own relations with Rhodesia and to try and pick up the threads of normal relations. To leave the House in no doubt, I also confirm that the amnesty contained in Clause 3 of the bill before the House does not apply to sanctions offences. Section 3, subsection 1b, little Roman 2 of the Southern Rhodesia Act 1979 already confers on the government the power to grant such an amnesty. My noble friend, the Foreign Secretary, informed the House during the debate on the bill of that. The matter is one which the government still have under consideration, and a further statement on that will be made in due course. Clauses 4 and 6 of the bill enable consequential changes to be made in the laws of the United Kingdom as a result of Rhodesian independence. Most of the necessary changes are already identified and are found in Schedules 2 and 3 of the bill. But, of course, there may be others which we have missed. Clause 4 would also enable the government to ensure that when payments for interest on redemption, interest on and redemption of Rhodesian stock, which have been in abeyance for 14 years, are resumed, the interest of creditors will be satisfied in an equitable manner. Clause 5 enables the government to deal with the situation should Rhodesia become a member of the Commonwealth after independence. Many of the changes in the laws of the United Kingdom made by this bill and its schedules would then be reversed. Schedule 2 deals more extensively with the consequences of Zimbabwe ceasing to be a part of Her Majesty's dominions without being a member of the Commonwealth. A number of acts which require that the holders of certain offices, including, I'm told, that of Lord Chancellor, should be British subjects. These restrictions will not apply to citizens of Zimbabwe for a period of 1 year after independence. They will also be allowed to remain members of local authorities until their term of office expires. They will remain eligible to vote at national and local government elections during the validity of any register on which they've been included whilst they were British subjects. And they will be exempt from the liability to deportation in certain cases for a period of 1 year, and in addition, any additional period during which their application for citizenship of the United Kingdom and colonies is under consideration. The transitional period of 12 months from the date of independence, during which these savings, as well as those affecting citizenship, will have effect, gives reasonable time for the new government of Zimbabwe to reach a decision on Commonwealth membership, and for an application to be dealt with by the Commonwealth, as well as for individuals to make any necessary adjustments in their private affairs. Schedule 2 also continues in force, provisions for the registration of colonial probits and maintenance orders, and those relating to a Dominion register of companies. Southern Rhodesians presently registered on a Commonwealth list under the Dentists Act and the Veterinary Surgeons Act will continue to be so registered. Schedule 3 provides for repeal of a number of measures relating to Southern Rhodesia which will no longer apply after independence, and for the deletion from various measures of certain references to Southern Rhodesia and to matters and persons connected with Southern Rhodesia. My Lords, though this bill deals with Southern Rhodesia and its future as Zimbabwe, the House would not wish me to conclude my speech without referring to the immense benefits that a peaceful settlement will confer on the lives and fortunes of neighboring peoples and neighboring governments. These governments have played a vital and valuable part in making a settlement possible, and we are deeply grateful to all of them. We have kept in close touch with them all, both in the preparation for the conference and throughout its course. There can be no doubt that their support and the support of the Commonwealth, the support of our partners in the EEC, our support from the United States and other governments for a negotiated settlement has been a major factor in persuading the two delegations at Lancaster House to accept the proposals put before the conference and to try to reconcile their differences. My Lords, I do not need to remind the House of the effect that the Rhodesian dispute has had on relations between the countries of the region. I hope that even before Zimbabwe attains independence, considerable progress can be made to normalize the country's relations with its neighbors. My Lords, the agreements reached at the conference, now awaiting signature, are perfectly fair and widely recognized internationally to be so. They've been achieved because both sides have recognized that there is a more excellent way to a happy future than the continuation of a costly and tragic war. Can either side step back at this late stage, withhold its consent? My Lords, I will not contemplate that possibility. In any event, nothing can obscure the fact that a constitution has been agreed, elections have been agreed, and a return to legality has been achieved. There is now no longer any reason to withhold legal independence from Rhodesia, provided that and as soon as elections have been held. It only remains for me to express the hope that the spirit of reason, which has characterized the conference up to this point, will be shown on all sides during the weeks leading up to independence. It is of crucial importance that the elections that are held should be and should be seen to be fair elections. Fair if this beautiful country is to return speedily to a normal relationship with the rest of the world. From all parties, this will demand restraint, and it will demand goodwill. A settlement has been achieved honorably. We must now see that it is implemented and observed honorably. My Lords, perhaps I may finish on a personal note. My father died in 1950. With the exception of 7 years I spent in the Commons, I have been in your Lordship's house throughout that period since. I've been a backbencher, I've been in opposition, I've held office, I've led the House, and now I am for the second time the occupant of the woolsack. Throughout that period of quarter of a century, the problems of southern Africa have bedeviled the relationship between races and nations and have baffled the efforts of successive governments to bring them to a peaceful settlement. Of those problems, the question of southern Rhodesia has proved the most intractable to date. We remember, my lords, the Federation. We remember Sir Roy Willinsky. We have sent out, particularly from this House, some of the best and wisest of our number, judges and statesmen, diplomats, soldiers, politicians. We have met round the table, we have met aboard ship, we have conducted inquiries, we have held debates, sometimes embittered by controversy amongst ourselves. But, my lords, what Southern Africa needs most is peace. What the world needs is peace. What the world needs, what Rhodesia needs, what Zambia needs, what Tanzania needs, what all Southern Africa needs is a period of stability. And stability can only be obtained through justice. Justice only by liberty under law. Liberty for all under a law just to all. This time we have within our grasp the chance of a major success. It's the first time we have come close, so close to one. It may be our last opportunity. This bill is a necessary condition of our achieving it. My lords, I beg to move. Question is, said bill be now read a second time.
My lords, the House will be very grateful to the noble and learned occupant of the woolsack for the superb clarity with which he has explained the contents of this very complicated and, as he said, historic bill. It comes to your lordships after second reading in another place, and it is not the normal practice of your lordship's House to refuse a second reading to a bill which has had that experience in the other place. Nor indeed does Her Majesty's opposition seek to do this today. This, however, does not mean that the misgivings we have expressed on this side of the House, especially in the last 2 or 3 weeks, about the timing and the sequence of events and action by the government, particularly in sending the governor to Zimbabwe before a ceasefire had been agreed by all the parties. And we have to repeat those reservations today, hoping profoundly that those reservations will be proved to be unfounded as events develop in Zimbabwe in the next few days and weeks. The Foreign Secretary has indeed exercised considerable skill in bringing the matter to the point at which it now stands. But we all agree and agree with the noble Lord, the Lord Chancellor, and welcome his references to the very considerable concessions made by other parties to the discussions in Lancaster House, including the Patriotic Front and the Massereene government, and not forgetting the important role played by the frontline presidents. Equally, the Commonwealth Secretariat, so ably led by Mr. Ramphel, its Secretary General, has from time to time made crucial contributions to resolving very difficult situations. Now, we hope that on this basis of the agreement so far achieved, the governor in Zimbabwe will succeed in the tasks, the very difficult tasks imposed upon him. We, for our part, fervently hope that he succeeds, and we certainly shall do everything we can to assist him in his work. I believe the opposition here and in another place and in the country have shown that they are keenly cognizant of the difficulties of this matter and have done or said nothing to hinder and everything to help the solution that may now be within sight. We particularly salute the courage of Lord Soames and Lady Soames in going out to Rhodesia under the conditions imposed upon them. They are going out without the fundamental assurance of an agreed ceasefire behind them. And in that set of circumstances, their courage is all the more remarkable. Now, so much for timing and sequence. The objectives of the bill before us are, of course, acceptable to Her Majesty's opposition, as they are, I believe, to the rest of Parliament and of the people. The bill, in fact, generally expresses the policy which we in government consistently pursued, not always with the full-hearted support and encouragement of the party opposite at that time. Nevertheless, we rejoice in their present sanctity, even if they are somewhat latter-day saints. And we look to many more agreeable U-turns of policy at home and abroad by the present government. The bill therefore seeks to achieve what we all want: an orderly, peaceful transition by Zimbabwe-Rhodesia to independence, hopefully within the Commonwealth, through the democratic and elective process. The objectives are agreed. Now, how are they to be achieved through this bill? The instrument, of course, is the governor. Now and until the day of independence, he is the government of Rhodesia. Or we might say, the United Kingdom is governing Rhodesia now and will continue to do so until the day of independence through a plenipotentiary who is the administrative, executive, and military head of the country. Now, what is his central task, as described in this bill and in the concomitant order? It is to organize free and fair elections. And that means that he has to make sure of a number of things. In particular, all the parties concerned must see that the arrangements for the elections and their conduct are fair and free. And at the top of the list of the things that he needs to do is equal access to the media for all parties taking part in the election. Now, the results of the election will not otherwise be seen to be credible, and they will not be accepted. For years, the Rhodesian broadcasting system has been the creature of the illegal regime, propagating the policies of the Smith Party, and latterly, the last few months, that of the Smith-Muzorewa regime. The staff, technical and editorial, have operated in that groove of partiality. It is not the BBC's World Service that has been put over the wires to the Rhodesian population. It is the news as prepared by the South African agency. Is that still the position? Is the Rhodesian radio still conducted by the same people and for the same purposes as has obtained in the last 14 years or so? Is not this one of the first things, if the election is to be seen to be free and fair, that should be put right? It is indeed essential that the position should be changed and that it should be seen to be changed. I understand that the governor left for Rhodesia without experts drawn from our own media to accompany him. I believe one member of the COI went out with him. Perhaps the minister, when he replies to the debate, will reassure us that the governor will have with him, has with him, or will have sent out to him personnel from our own media, particularly from the BBC, which enjoys a deservedly high reputation in Africa and indeed throughout the world, so that this essential of a free and fair election is properly taken in hand. Now, secondly, what is being done about the political detainees? It is no good making elaborate preparations for an election when perhaps 18,000 people who have very definite views about what kind of government should be elected as a result of that election are not in the country to take part in the election. What steps have been taken to release them? The political detainees, I'm not referring now to those who are imprisoned for criminal reasons. Are the political detainees being freed and enabled to vote and work for the kind of government they want? And what about the refugees, both inside and outside Rhodesia? There may be as many as 250,000 Rhodesians who are in fact refugees from their own homes. Will the Electoral Commissioner make arrangements for those people, they are a very substantial body indeed, to return to their districts, to take part in the election and to vote on election day? And of course, the release of detainees and the facilitating of the return of refugees to their homes applies equally to the Patriotic Front and to any irregular organization which may be detaining anybody or preventing anybody from returning to his home. The message is mainly to the government of Rhodesia, that is, to the united government operating in Rhodesia through the governor, mainly to him, but equally to those who are in command of a great deal of territory and under whom a great many people are at present living. The Electoral Commission, of course, coming as it does from personnel in this country, will make a very good job of the election. But that is not enough, unless in fact everything possible has been done to enable the maximum possible number of the population to be registered and to take part in the election and to avail themselves of a free media. Then even the most tightly organized election will not carry with it, either in Rhodesia or abroad, the credibility that it must have. And third, all sections of the people of Zimbabwe Rhodesia must see for themselves that the United Kingdom, through the governor, is already beginning on the task of reorganizing, reconstructing, in fact, the economic life of the country, and looking to a future of cooperation with and practical assistance for the new independent Zimbabwe, and indeed of practical assistance to countries like Zambia, who have suffered greatly as a result of UDI and of the resultant sanctions regime. In Rhodesia itself, a great many schools, local clinics, hospitals, and other facilities have been closed or destroyed in the past few years. In Rhodesia itself, there are local scarcities of food, of medicaments, of essential provisions. It is mainly a matter of transport, of organization, and a cessation of the fighting and cooperation on all sides in order to get these facilities going again and the resources to flow more freely may very quickly solve the position. But I make the point that while we are organizing the elections, there is also a need to proceed with the practical policy of reconstructing the life of the country and of certainly attending to the more immediate urgencies, such as those I've mentioned. May I also ask, what is the position about the supply of maize and indeed of food generally to Zambia and the restoration of communications with that country? There is an impression, I think, that maize and other foodstuffs have begun to flow freely again into Zambia. Some of us have been disturbed in the last day or so to be told from dependable sources, that this is not so, that the food is not moving into Zambia yet. I think it is a matter of some priority that attention should be given to this matter, and that Zambia should receive its customary supplies, especially of maize, and that we should do everything we can to rebuild the bridges in more senses than one. Because Zambia, through its president, has made a vital contribution to the development of this agreement. And I hope, indeed I assume, that while the work of negotiating the transition to independence has been proceeding, the government have at the same time been thinking ahead about the problems of reconstruction. Once more, one has to remind oneself that there may be a copybook election, but if the electors themselves do not find a comparable movement forward in reform and reconstruction, in the economic reassurances which they seek, then a vacuum of loyalty may be created despite the elections into which undemocratic and wholly uncongenial forces may flow. Politics alone is never enough. It must be supported by constructive economic action. Now, the bill, as we heard, does not name a date for independence, and the reason is that between the enactment of this bill and the granting of independence, there may be developments which affect the very date of independence. Now, we do not disagree with this procedure, but we do feel that the government would have been well advised to make the order subject to affirmative resolution in both houses. The point was very ably argued by my right honourable friend, Mr. Shaw, in the other place last week, and he was strongly supported in the House. We regret. We hope indeed that before the end of today's proceedings, the government may think again about this and decide that an order of this kind, naming the date of independence, could, without creating any kind of delay or breaking the momentum of events, be placed for affirmative approval before both houses. As it is, whatever happens in Rhodesia, However unsatisfactory the conduct of the elections may prove to be, we very much hope that they will prove to be totally satisfactory to all who take part. But even if a situation arises there which gives ground for serious concern, the government nevertheless, under the bill and the consequent provisions which flow from it, may designate a date for independence without putting the matter to Parliament for discussion and providing it with the opportunity of determining finally whether the true conditions of independence have in fact been fulfilled. We have, as the noble Viscount knows, been considering on this side of the House whether to put down an amendment today, a manuscript amendment. We have finally decided against that course, but I do make a last appeal to the government to reconsider its position on this. At the very least, realizing as they must the strong feelings of the opposition on this point, will they not at least give this assurance that a report on the conduct of the elections shall be made to Parliament and opportunity for discussing that report be provided before the order is made? Because our responsibility does not end with the second reading of this bill. It will not even finally come to an end when we are able to say in the British Parliament we are satisfied that the elections have been so held as to show conclusively the wishes of the Rhodesia people, and therefore the date for independence is hereby approved. Now I press on as quickly as possible, as others wish to speak. I am glad to see that Clause 2 deals fairly with the questions of nationality. There are some 150,000 Rhodesians whose position might be unfairly prejudiced if an abrupt change were made in their status, and the provision for the categories which we have heard described seem to us to be eminently fair. The clause in the bill which deals with amnesty equally is acceptable to us, although we will wish to study perhaps a little bit more closely the form of words used by the noble and learned Lord in introducing this bill. Suffice it to say for the moment that the clause in making provision for amnesty is in a humane and constructive tradition. No reconciliation is possible in circumstances such as this if there is a backwash of revenge, of persecution after independence. We have many examples to draw on to show that amnesty is the best policy when independence has been achieved. I would not say through a process, but in an atmosphere, in an adversary atmosphere. And without amnesty in these terms, reconciliation might be postponed or even made impossible. We also very much welcome the opportunity provided for the new independent state to join the Commonwealth, if it so wishes, and if the Commonwealth, of course, agrees. Membership is by application. And I hope Zimbabwe will indeed decide to apply for membership. And I may be permitted to hope that another member of the Commonwealth, our own country, may be one of its sponsors on that happy day. I am sure it would be to the benefit not only of Zimbabwe, but also of the Commonwealth. The role of the Commonwealth and of the Commonwealth Secretariat in promoting a solution of this difficult problem, especially since the Lusaka Conference, has been considerable. Once more, we have been reminded of the strength of the links between widely diverse countries that make up its membership. If Zimbabwe chooses to join, it will find itself among friends old and new, not least of whom will be the United Kingdom. So, my lords, we extend to this bill and its purposes our warm support. We regret that the order which is consequent upon it in relation to the date of independence is not made subject to affirmative resolution by both houses. And we ask the government, even at this late hour, it is perfectly possible to look at this again. We agree with the purpose. We are bound to repeat our misgivings about the handling and the timing, last 2 or 3 weeks. It smacks a little bit of bouncing. Now, bouncing people into a position of agreement when fundamentally they do not agree may succeed at the time, but only for a time. Sooner or later, the basic differences and resentments will surface. We very much hope that the methods as well as the purposes which the government have adopted for this purpose will succeed. It will be the triumph not of one party, but the victory of our whole nation, which wishes for Zimbabwe, as it has for its previous dependencies, nothing but peace, stability, and prosperity.
My lords, after this rather long interchange, we perhaps should come back to the subject of Rhodesia. My lords, it is, as I see it, a pity, a great pity, that we cannot make our approval of this bill the occasion for expressing our gratitude to the government, and indeed to all those who have assisted them in the recent negotiations, including, I need say, the Commonwealth Secretariat, for having achieved a very remarkable settlement, at least setting the stage for the possible emergence of a new and viable state out of the chaos and misery of a long civil war. For this settlement, my lords, is, after all, not yet in the bag, though the government, judging from the press, are clearly confident that it shortly will be. Your lordships will recall that the last time we discussed this matter, both the noble Lord Goronwy-Roberts and I expressed what I might say was some disquiet about the decision to send out the governor before the ceasefire was actually in operation. And as I think noble Lord said, we can only continue to express our apprehensions, we can only hope that our apprehensions were unjustified. It was admittedly, and I think this was admitted by everybody, it was admittedly a great gamble. But in any case, I should like to associate myself with the noble Lord Goronwy-Roberts in expressing and paying tribute to the great courage of Lord Soames in the mission he is now undertaking. My lords, nobody can say that the elections, which if all goes still according to plan, will now take place, I understand, about some 3 months from now, nobody can say that they will necessarily result in the installation of a government firmly based on a majority of the nation, or even that something like a conventional democratic system will necessarily follow. Nobody can deny that, on the contrary, there is a possibility that they will result in a bitter struggle for power. That could in itself produce another civil war of quite another character. But at least, my lords, at least a regime may emerge now that will enable the white community to continue to take a useful part in the development of the country while ceasing to play a dominant political role. That is what the long negotiations in Lancaster House have at least made possible. Now, if so, it is likely that the ravages of the war will fairly soon be made good. It's astonishing how soon ravages of war can be made good. And Zimbabwe will then become, as it will inevitably become, if racial and tribal tendencies can be overcome, one of the richest and the most prosperous states in Africa. And not only that, the hope will be that such a development would have a profound effect for good south of the border in the Republic of South Africa itself, thus tending to reduce the intensity of the potential racial conflict that may then get out of hand in that part of the world, with appalling results for all of us. And if there is, after all, no agreement, if after all there is no agreement on a ceasefire in the next few days, what will happen then? Well, if that means that the elections will have to be conducted while a civil war is still raging, it's obvious that nothing like such a happy development will be possible. Even if they are held and do produce a majority in favor of some coalition presided over presumably by Bishop Massereene, as would seem likely given the great support that he is likely to have from many quarters, I understand, there is no guarantee, even then, that we should be able to achieve general recognition for it. Worse still, we might, as a government, be directly involved in a civil war. And this, of course, would be even more likely, indeed, my lords, it would be certain, in the event of no elections being possible, after we have nevertheless assumed responsibility for actually governing the country. So, as it seems to me, it is essential for us to have a ceasefire in order to put the whole agreement into operation and allow, if possible, for it to function as a great experiment in interracial cooperation. But, my lords, objectively considered, it might well be equally disastrous, one would have thought, for the Patriotic Front to have to continue the war with evidently less sympathy and even support coming from the outside, and with some prospect of being defeated in the sense of not being able at least to impose themselves or play any part in the life of the new regime. It may indeed be that they might not obtain an actual majority in the elections, if they are held, but at least it would seem likely that they would achieve some kind of representation, and as powerful and responsible leaders, they would surely be able to exert great influence on the new government in Salisbury in favor of their own political ideas, whatever they may be. Therefore, it would appear to be madness for them to decide in favor of a continuance of the war, and we can only hope, with some confidence, that the hold-up and the ceasefire will be temporary and will be fairly soon resolved. The difficulties will be resolved. My lords, I turn to the bill itself. As your lordships are perhaps aware, the Liberal spokesman in another place voted in favour of the amendment referred to by noble Lord Goronwy-Roberts, submitted by Mr. Peter Shaw, whereby any order in council of the nature indicated in paragraph 1, I think it is, of the bill, in section 1, should only come into force after a draft order had been approved by both Houses of Parliament. And the purpose of this amendment was evident. Any decision to grant final independence would have to be dependent on elections having been held and found to be fair and free and fair. And here might I just say that I agree very much with what the noble Lord Goronwy-Roberts said, that if the method of broadcasting news, if indeed the whole broadcasting system in Salisbury is now changed for the better and becomes more objective, it would be an excellent preface to holding of free and fair elections by any consideration. And in addition, if the governor should see fit now to free a good many of the detainees, that again would create the right atmosphere in which free and fair elections could likely to be held. But under the bill as it stands, of course, this decision, the decision to recognize independence will be left under the bill to the government of the day, which might or might not, my lords, reflect the views and the mood of the nation. No doubt if the elections are held and duly monitored, and if Commonwealth observers pronounce them as free and fair, that will in practice be the end of the matter. Of course it will be. But it is after all possible that there may be ambiguities, more especially if the complete peace does not prevail during the elections, or, worse still, if the Commonwealth observers are by any chance divided. And in such circumstances, it might well be preferable, I should have thought, for the vital decision to be left to both Houses of Parliament. Well, my lords, we feel, we've mentioned in here, that since the other place has taken a decision in this matter, it is not for this House to attempt to overturn it, and it would be irregular, and probably inadvisable, as the noble Lord Gridley has recognised, even to put down an amendment, as was put down in the other place. But I do wish to associate myself with the noble Lord in suggesting that, in view of what's been said and what perhaps other people may say, perhaps even at this late hour, the government might have second thoughts, or at least in some way indicate their willingness in the last resort to leave this question open when the bill goes through. My lords, I haven't anything really else to say about the bill, I think, except I think it's technical, but as the noble Lord sits on the woolsack explained so lucidly, it seems inherently reasonable. Nobody want to quarrel with it as such. It's evident, I think, that since there are 80,000 British subjects who can claim British passports now resident in Rhodesia, and another 70,000 who have the right of abode in this country, 150,000 in all, I suppose it's possible, I don't know if I'm right in saying, that if the worst should happen, and all 150,000 wanted to come back to this country, they could. I imagine it's extremely unlikely, but one must remember what happened in Algeria when General de Gaulle came to a certain conclusion in Algeria. No less than 700,000 French citizens came back to France. Well, it was quite possible for the French state to absorb 700,000, and they did very satisfactorily in a year or two. And even if a certain number of these people who have a right to come back to this country want to come back, it seems to me that we should be able perfectly well to accommodate them here, and indeed we should welcome them. They are, for the most part, I think, their ancestors or themselves went out there with the great approval of the government and often urged on by the government to go and settle in Rhodesia. And therefore, I think that they have, if not their fault, perhaps if things have gone wrong in the interval, we should be able to welcome them back here if they take it into their heads to come back here one day. The only other point I'd like to make, I do hope, I don't come into the bill, but I do hope that the government will be very generous in granting aid to repair the ravages of war in Rhodesia when and if there is independence takes place. I cannot see why, if necessary, some of the money we vote on the present aid bill should not be deducted and deflected to Rhodesia. It seems to me that a good deal of that money might be much better spent in Rhodesia repairing the ravages of war than sometimes devoted to the occasionally rather dubious purposes to which it is put under the Act. Well, all I can say, therefore, my lords, that I wish the bill well, and I only hope that the difficulty covering the final agreement on the ceasefire will be overcome very shortly. If it is, not only should we all have to think again, if it is not, if there is no agreement on a ceasefire, well, we should all obviously have to think again, and our thoughts may well not be very agreeable, nor possibly unanimous for that matter. Indeed, as I see it myself, we might even be not far short of a state of national emergency. And what the political implications of that might be is anybody's guess.
My lords, I cannot with sincerity join in the chorus of congratulations that has been given to the noble Lord, the Foreign Secretary, over the conduct of this conference. And I'm sure he is the last person who would want insincere compliments paid to him. I believe he has made mistakes. I believe he has aroused unnecessary frictions, and as I shall try and show in my speech, I believe that the conference could have been concluded successfully much earlier. However, I would like to congratulate him, and very sincerely, on 2 points. The first, in cutting the talons of his own Prime Minister and those members of his own party who have been traditionally supporters of the Ian Smith white supremacy regime, and more lately of the Smith Massereene regime, and forcing a change in what was thought to be, at the time of the election, Conservative Party policy. And secondly, I would like particularly to congratulate him on his great courage in doing what no British government has had the courage to do since 1965, and that is to involve the responsibility of the British government and the British Parliament, which I believe has always been the crucial issue in the ending of UDI. And that, I believe, has given Britain the opportunity for the first time to lead towards a possibly successful conclusion to this unhappy chapter in our colonial history. I do not believe that the noble Lord, the Foreign Secretary, was wise in his choice of the governor for Rhodesia, and I will say why. We all admire the noble Lord, Lord Soames. We all enjoy his bluffness and good humor. But I believe that the Foreign Secretary has put him in an impossible position. I believe he's put him in that impossible position, first of all, because Lord Soames would be the first to agree that he is an unashamed member of the Conservative Party and always has been, and that in itself is a political disadvantage in Rhodesia today. And secondly, he is a member of the Conservative Cabinet, and as a member of the Conservative Party and the Conservative Cabinet, he is bound to inherit the favour that has been shown towards the Massereene regime over the past 9 months. He is bound to inherit at least a part of the opposition which was made by the Conservative Party to the attempts by my friend, the Right Honourable David Owen, and the Secretary of State for the United States, and in taking with him inevitably this prejudice, he has been put in a situation in which he cannot be seen to be as impartial as he himself would no doubt wish to be. Nevertheless, like every other member of this House, I wish him well, I wish him all the luck, and I wish him strength during the almost impossible task which he has been given by this government. But I would just like to remind him that he is in Africa, not in Europe, and because he has had no experience of Africa, he must find the conditions, he must find the spiritual atmosphere of Africa, so very different, and as many members of this House will agree with me, that atmosphere takes some time to learn. Now, my lords, we are talking this afternoon not about a bill which is bringing to an end a period of 14 years. We're talking about a bill which is bringing to an end a period, and a sad period, of 90 years. And let us remember that the people that we are talking about, on whom the future of Zimbabwe depends, feel themselves to be coming to the end of that 90-year period, not a 14-year period. During that 90-year period, one major historical principle has been demonstrated time after time after time, which surely we have learnt throughout the history of the British and other European empires. And that principle is quite simply that if there are no constitutional channels open to reform which enables every citizen to participate in the conduct of the society in which he lives, then violence and force is inevitable. And the history of the last 90 years in Rhodesia, now to be called Zimbabwe, bears out that principle to the very last syllable. To the African, the men who we see in London today, Joshua Nkomo and Robert Mugabe, are the inheritors, going right back to the days of Lobengula, who to the African had the land stolen from him and his people. To Chilembe in Nyasaland, who raised the spirit of revolt against white domination in the middle of the First World War. To the Reverend Sam Kenge, who was one of the initiators of the African Congress in southern Rhodesia itself. They are the inheritors, and they are the inheritors who continued that fight when southern Rhodesia became a part of the Central African Federation, because that federation, they believed, was still based on the essential principle that the man and woman with the white skin had a God-given right to rule, which they would not accept. They continued that fight through the Federation. They continued that fight against the Ian Smith regime. And they have won that fight. They have won that fight because that fight was not for their individual power, nor for the power of any individual party. That fight was for national self-determination. That fight was for the right of every individual in Rhodesia to participate in the government of the country. And that fight is won. And so we are talking now about the details. I am not for one moment suggesting that it's impossible to reverse it. There have been many reverses of national self-determination, of universal suffrage in the past. But the 90-year fight has been won this year, and it has been won as a result of the collective effort going right back to 1890. And of course it was the breakup of that federation, the breakup which was caused by the efforts of those in Zambia and in Malawi who fought for national independence, that left us this residual problem that we have been discussing ever since 1964. We had to find some conditions under which southern Rhodesia could become independent like the other members of the Federation. But those in power in southern Rhodesia were not prepared to accept the same conditions as had been applied in every other single British colony at the time of independence, universal suffrage. And so we lay down that first, the Constitution, the new Constitution, must depend upon the will and arise out of the will of the people. That elections must be held with equal opportunities for all groups and all parties. That there should be universal suffrage. And also that we should observe our international obligations. And I was listening very carefully to the noble and learned Lord on the Woolsack when he introduced this bill in his so lucid style, because I remember the speech that he made very well in the debate on sanctions of 13 months ago, and the stress that he made on our obligations, on our international obligations. And I'm wondering tonight whether our unilateral rescinding of sanctions is in line, is in conjunction with our international obligations. Should we not have gone first to the Security Council, where we had initially asked for sanctions to be imposed, rather than take that action ourselves. And of course, we could not fulfill any of these obligations until we had found the means of ending the Civil War. And in that respect, again, I pay tribute to the noble Lord, the Foreign Secretary, for holding his own party, or a section of his own party, back until he could get to Lusaka and get the support of the Commonwealth to make it possible for the British government to take action which could lead to the end of the Civil War. And so we came to the period of the Lancaster House Conference. I have not much to say about that conference, but we have passed rather quickly over its details, and some of us on this side have quite deliberately avoided being provocative or asking awkward questions whilst the conference was taking place. But now the time has come to say that on the first issue, on the Constitution, I am very dubious about some of the clauses within that Constitution and some of the principles enshrined. I believe that it is much more in keeping with African tradition to have an executive president than it is to have an imitation of the Westminster system of a constitutional president and a prime minister. I believe that the Patriotic Front was right to oppose specific racial representation in separating members of Parliament according to the colours of their skin. And I believe that there was a mistake made when the certain vital sections of the Bill of Rights was made subject to 100% vote, which I believe is unique anywhere in the world. Secondly, on the interim period, I believe that the Foreign Secretary has always been wrong in resisting the clamant demands from a whole variety of sources to organize a peacekeeping force based on the Commonwealth large enough to keep the peace. And I believe that the reason that he did so was nothing more than his reaction to the Owen Vance plan, which had laid down a United Nations peacekeeping force which could have been of great value during this period. And secondly, it is absolutely essential that during this interim period, equality is applied and seen to be applied to the forces of the two sides. But remember, when we are saying that we are talking in equal terms about the Patriotic Front forces who have been fighting for self-determination on the one hand, and on the other hand, the Salisbury forces who have been fighting to maintain a rebellion and to maintain white control of that country. There is at least a strong argument for reverse discrimination, to give extra opportunities to the Patriotic Front to catch up with their backlog in electoral organization. And then the sending of the governor before the ceasefire. Well, I had understood that the noble Lord, the Foreign Secretary, had pledged in this House that the governor would not be sent to that country until the ceasefire was agreed. And I think he's been put in an impossible position. And I think he's been put in an impossible position because we want to know what has happened since the governor arrived in Salisbury and what is going to happen. We want to know why it is that the Patriotic Front parties are still bound in Salisbury. I was perfectly satisfied with what the noble and learned Lord said about the amnesty. The amnesty obviously does not apply to breaches of British law against sanctions, and therefore does not apply to the question I asked this afternoon about the Bingham report. But here we have a situation with a British governor in charge who is still maintaining the ban on those parties that are to be allowed to take part in the election and who obviously represent several 100,000 at least, if not millions, of people in that country. And we see just on Saturday, one of the leaders of that party, Mr. Msipa, arrested and charged with conducting an illegal demonstration, although he is representing one of the parties to the Lancaster House Conference. Now, how can you put a governor in that kind of stupid position? We have not seen any repeal of martial law. We have not seen any cancellations of the executions. And remember that those executions were ordered under an illegal regime, and many of them carried out despite the personal plea of Her Majesty that they should not be carried out. And we're still asking for an amnesty and for reconciliation and so on, but the people who are dead are not going to be very impressed by that kind of reconciliation. And I would like to ask the noble lord who is to wind up if he will answer me a specific question which arises from a statement made by the Honourable Minister in another place. Is it the case that since the governor arrived, the South African forces, that is, South African personnel and, as admitted by the British military authorities, South African units, have been withdrawn from Zimbabwe? Because on the 12th of December, the Under-Secretary of State had this to say: during the pre-independence period, and after the presence, therefore, of the governor in Salisbury, there can be and will be no foreign involvement. Has that foreign involvement ceased or not? I think we are entitled to a specific answer. We have heard this afternoon of the dangers that the ceasefire may not be signed. I think it will be signed, but I don't think that that is the most important issue. Unfortunately, in the conduct of the ceasefire negotiations, there can be no doubt, and I differ here with the noble and learned lord on the Woolsack, this is not a political decision. This is a decision which involves the safety of the people who have been fighting for self-determination. And the fact that the arrangements were made, the arrangements for the locations in the ceasefire were made between the British government and by General Walls representing the Salisbury forces, has inevitably and naturally angered the Patriotic Front. After all, they remember that it's only a few months since the erstwhile colleague of Bishop Massereene, the Reverend Sitoli's forces, were massacred by the bishop's forces, by the security forces. 183 of them were massacred this summer. Now, can you expect, with that very recent experience, that the Patriotic Front is going to put its forces in a position in which they can be massacred, either by air or by land power? And now we come to the real crunch of the present deadlock, the locations. Well, really, this seems so stupid from the government's point of view. There have been suspicions that the Patriotic Front would not send all their forces into the assembly points. But the Patriotic Front is being honest. They are saying, when the British government says to them, each assembly point will have 1,000 men there, they are saying, well, we have got 30,000, 31,000 men. So we need 31,000 assembly points. British government says, no, we'll give you a great concession. We'll raise the number from 15 to 16. All right, what happens? You have 1,000 men in each of these 15 to 16 assembly points, and the rest stay in the bush. And that is the inevitable consequence of the British government's policy. And they are inviting the Patriotic Front to keep their people, to keep their armed people in the bush, because they will not grant what seems to be obvious, the opportunity for the Patriotic Front to have all its forces in assembly points, and assembly points which are so located that they can be protected from attack by the security forces. Not only have you cast doubts on the good faith of the Patriotic Front, but when the Patriotic Front has shown good faith, then you have thrown it back in their teeth. And so they are now invited by the British government. They are invited to stay in the bush to the danger of the future of the ceasefire. There's another point that I would like to ask the noble Lord to clear up, and it arises out of paragraph 25 of the British government's paper to the Lancaster House Conference of December the 5th on the ceasefire. And the paragraph reads, or a part of the paragraph reads, if, however, all Patriotic Front forces inside Rhodesia assemble with their arms, and where there is no further movement by externally based Patriotic Front forces into Rhodesia, there would be no need in those circumstances for the governor to ask the Rhodesian forces to deploy from their company bases. What does that mean? Does that mean that the governor is going to use the present Salisbury security forces to suppress any possible ceasefire amongst the patriotic forces? Who is going to suppress? There are bound to be incidents. Who is going to be told by the governor to suppress any ceasefire violations? Is it going to be, this is a specific question, is it going to be the responsibility of the security forces to suppress their own breaches of ceasefire and the Patriotic Front to suppress their own? Or is it, as this paragraph appears to make clear, that the governor is going to use the present security forces in order to suppress breaches of the ceasefire by the Patriotic Front? I think we are entitled to an answer, and I think the Patriotic Front is entitled to an answer. And finally on this point, please may I ask the Minister to look again at the desperately important issue of the Air Force bases. As I understand it, only 2 Air Force bases are going to be monitored. The Minister knows, everybody knows, that there are far more than 2 Air Force bases controlled by the security forces in Rhodesia. Far more. I can mention you 2 right now. You have got in your paper, you have got Salisbury, you've got Gwellow. What about Hartley? What about Wanky? And so one could go on. I would ask for a specific answer about how many Air Force bases have been identified and who is going to monitor them, because this is where the Patriotic Front is quite naturally very nervous that when its forces are deployed in these assembly points, they will be open to air attack, as we have seen take place throughout Rhodesia and in neighboring countries. And so finally to the future. The future, I'm worried about one word in the future, and I will raise this on the committee stage. It's the word irreversible, which was used in another place, and which was used in a different way by the noble and learned Lord on the Woolsack when he said we cannot take an open-minded commitment. I think we want to know whether, in all circumstances, this bill is giving the government the power to grant independence. And I remember particularly a statement made some years ago by my old friend Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Salisbury, that one of the basic... Singapore, I'm sorry. The Prime Minister of Singapore. I thank the noble and learned Lord. When he was talking about the consequences of the end of the British Empire, and he said, and said very boldly to his fellow ex-colonials, that the trouble was that the British had given responsibility without power, that they had given political responsibility but without the security and without the structure of defense to maintain that political settlement. I believe that that is a danger today, and I believe that again the Foreign Secretary has made a mistake in turning down the proposals that were made by my right honourable friend in another place and the Secretary of State for the United States, and above all by our noble Lord Carver, in having an independent force there that could integrate the security forces during the interim period, that could begin, and Lord Carver had the skeleton of a plan to integrate those forces so that when the new government was elected, it inherited the power to support its own political structure. And you know this goes farther because everybody is talking about the danger after an election of a coup. And that inevitably comes up in regard to the location of the forces. The danger of a military coup conducted by the military forces now or previously under Bishop Massereene and Ian Smith, supported by the South Africans as a part of their policy of developing what they called their constellation of Southern African states. And it would only be if during the interim period a force was gathered together and trained at least to the point in which there is a national force, there is a national army, a national police force that is inherited by the new government, that this danger could be reasonably expected to be avoided. But as we pass this bill, let us express the hope let us first express our thanks to the many non-government organizations, to the Commonwealth Secretariat under Sonny Ramphal, to the frontline presidents, to the Nigerian government, to the Patriotic Front and the Massereene government, and to many others that the noble Lord will know. And let us express the hope that in the coming months and years, which are going to be very, very delicate and very, very fraught, the hard, patient work that has been done behind the scenes by so many organizations is continued now. Continued with this further responsibility which falls on us all, and I include myself entirely here, to mediate, to reconcile, to help in development. But let us always remember that we are facing this prospect. We are facing the expectations of land reform, of the redistribution of wealth, of employment where there is unemployment, and above all of peace. We are facing that at the end of a period, not of 14 years, but of 90 years, during which the vast majority of the inhabitants of Zimbabwe believe that they have been ruled by other people and are determined now to rule themselves.
That he appeared to be worried about foreign intervention, but he doesn't appear to be at all worried about Soviet intervention. He doesn't appear to be worried about the hundreds of officers and advisors who are training the guerrilla armies in Mozambique and Zambia. He's not worried about the two Russian generals who will be based in Osaka for some time. That his argument really appears to be actually very one-sided and actually most impartial. Actually not at all impartial.
Well, I'm glad that the noble Lord has raised that point, because it's a point that's been made by so many noble lords on this side, and indeed by a number of noble lords on the other side of the House. Of course there are Soviet advisors. Of course there are Soviet weapons. Of course there is a danger of the involvement of Cuban troops, just as there was the involvement of Cuban troops in Angola. When? After the South African army, as attested by the Americans, invaded that country. So that, yes, we are. The Africans want to exclude all foreign influence. But the influence of South Africa has been there for a very much longer time than that of the Soviet Union, long before the Soviet Union was ever heard of. And so long as there is the danger of intervention from the South Africans, from mercenaries, from other parts of the world, so long will the forces that have been fighting for self-determination inevitably turn to those who will help them. They're not turning to the Russians because they're Russians, they're turning to the Russians because they cannot get help from Western Europe.
My Lord, if I may say so at the beginning of my speech, I think it is a pity that the noble Lord Harlech of Lusby has given us the impression that he has spoken in this House this afternoon, not in the independent stance which noble Lord should on all sides obtain, but as a spokesman of the Patriotic Front. My Lords, we in this House have different views about the past, and I shall be referring to them shortly. But I'm quite certain that all of us today, as I wish to take only a few minutes of your Lordship's time, agree that we wish my noble friend Lord Soames success in his sudden assignment, and offer my noble friend the Foreign Secretary our warmest congratulations on a major achievement in the field of British diplomacy and statesmanship. Some people, perhaps I may go on, the noble Lord had nearly half an hour. Some people have tended to criticise the length of the Lancaster House Conference. Negotiations about Africa with Africans are not amenable to the hectic timescale of diplomacy in Europe and America. Your Lordships will perhaps recollect that Rhodes's successful negotiations with the Matabelean Dunas in 1896 lasted on a daily basis from August to October. That was to settle 4 months of violence, not 7 years of escalating civil war. The Foreign Secretary, in handling these recent negotiations with Bishop Massereene and the Patriotic Front and the Rhodesian Front, has shown the same patience and decision that Rhodes showed on that occasion, and that has been, in my view, the basis of his success. My Lords, it gives me particular pleasure to be able to say this, because when in 1968 my noble friend Lord Carrington, as leader of the opposition, brought about the defeat of the Southern-Rhodesian Order in Council on sanctions in this House, I led a handful of Conservative peers in the support of its continuance. I opposed my noble friend Lord Hume of the Hirsel's compact with Mr. Ian Smith in 1972. I did not believe that it was a British solution to the problem of Rhodesia, in accordance with the long-determined policies of the United Kingdom. And I think I can say that the Pearce Commission subsequently confirmed that that view was right. Therefore, I am naturally glad that after so many years, to hope that at last a British solution for the problems of Rhodesia may be on the threshold of achievement. That was, if I may say so, after all, what I was sent to help to bring about in 1961, and which as a servant of a British government of a different political persuasion, and as a private member of your Lordship's House, have tried to do ever since. And now, at the end of this tale of failure and frustration, and 14 years of UDI, what is the balance sheet? 20,000 dead, a beautiful and happy country in the process of political and social disintegration, neighbours in Zambia and Botswana gravely affected, the intrusion of communist influence over the whole of southern Africa facilitated, and why? Because the British solution for the future of that country of Rhodesia was cynically rejected in 1962, and that rejection was dramatically endorsed in 1965. And now, my lords, with good fortune under Providence, there may be a British solution. Not as appropriate a solution as could have been achieved in 1962, not a solution as favourable to the Europeans or the Africans in Rhodesia, not a solution which can bring to life the dead, not a solution which can open up the certainty of creating in Rhodesia a multiracial state on the British model which was possible 20 years ago. Nevertheless, a British solution, with for a few weeks a British governor in Government House in Salisbury and a few hundred British civil servants and soldiers endeavouring to rescue black and white from the consequences of the stupidity, selfishness and malignity of those who over these last 14 years have derided this country and vilified its leaders and have done untold damage to the real interests of Southern Africa and the Western world in general. My Lords, for some time past, I have been of the opinion that it was too late for Britain to find a solution which would avoid ultimate disaster in Rhodesia. I think that the prospects today are pretty small. Nevertheless, I think it would be wrong not to acknowledge the courage which Her Majesty's government have shown in undertaking a commitment where the cards are so heavily stacked against success. And I believe that it is right now that everyone should give it wholehearted support. It is a gamble with the residual authority of this country derived from its imperial era, and with our credibility in international politics. If it succeeds, our action will have great advantages for Africa and to our own international standing. It may give fresh life to the Commonwealth from which this initiative was derived. It is something which is expected of us by our friends all over the world. If we did not make this effort, even at this 13th hour, if we were not prepared to take this gamble, if we were seen to shirk a responsibility which we acknowledge to be ours, then I think we would have felt an overwhelming sense of guilt as we stood by as helpless spectators of the subsequent unfolding tragedy. Therefore, my Lords, if it fails, I shall not be among those who seek to blame the government or criticise the Foreign Secretary from the comfortable vantage point of hindsight. And if that does happen, I hope that those who do so will remember that the noble Lord Soames will be the only British governor of a dependency in history who has been commissioned to exercise direct personal rule without a single instrument of the authority of this country at his disposal, except the commission bearing Her Majesty's signature. No United Kingdom recruited civil service, no battalions and units of the British Army, no staff with experience of Rhodesia, nothing except his own judgment and personality. My Lords, one cannot go on forever sustaining old bitterness or grieving over the mistakes and lost opportunities of the past. One of the greatest of the virtues of the English is that they combine an enduring respect for history and precedent with an ability to consign to oblivion the events and bitterness of the more recent past themselves. Our own civil war 3 centuries ago ended with an act of indemnity and oblivion. The bill before us, in Clause 3, contains much the same provision. It covers, as I understand it from the noble and learned Lord on the Woolsack, everything done in terms of the law of the United Kingdom by everyone, Rhodesian Front, Patriotic Front, security forces, guerrillas, the lot. It seeks, as he said, to wipe the slate clean. That, I am sure, as far as we are concerned here in this country, when independence comes to Zimbabwe, the state, as far as we're concerned, will be clean. But whether such magnanimity is possible to black and white in Zimbabwe in the next few months, despite the hatreds and bitterness caused by these last many years, whether racial, economic, and above all tribal differences will be submerged in the creation of a hopeful future for a Zimbabwe at peace, well, that I do not know. They have, been deplorable defects in the qualities of the leadership which the African peoples of Zimbabwe have produced from their own ranks during these last 20 years. Yet I know that there is a potential among the Africans in Zimbabwe and among those who have been driven from it since 1965, which could make it the progressive, multiracial, prosperous country which has always been British policy to create in that part of Africa. It is perhaps still possible that this may happen. It will require special qualities on behalf of everyone, of tolerance, good sense and patriotism for both black and white, which frankly have seldom been evidenced elsewhere in history. It could be that the men and women of Zimbabwe, Shona, Matabele, European, Asian and coloured, can during the next few months provide Africa and the rest of the world with an example of how to resolve a problem of human and political relationships of worldwide significance. And we here, my lords, today in the Parliament at Westminster have at any rate the satisfaction of knowing that by passing this bill, we will be giving them the chance.
Before the noble lord sits down, can I put it to him, and I have the most enormous respect and admiration for the noble lord who's just spoken, can he not understand that many of us on this side of the House, we applaud to an enormous extent everything that the Foreign Secretary has done. We think he has made an enormous breakthrough, but can he not understand that we may have reservations without saying anything unkind or criticising the Foreign Secretary?
Noble and learned lady has never said anything unkind or ungracious about anyone, and I'm quite certain that nothing like that would ever apply to her.
The Lord sits down a second time. May I associate myself with everything that my noble friend Lady Gaitskell said about the noble Lord Alport, in whom, as he knows, I've always had both a regard and an affection. But as he referred to me personally, would he just recognize that it is essential for some of us, with the kind of principles that we hold, to make a sharp differentiation between those who have been fighting in Rhodesia for self-determination and those who have been fighting to maintain a rebellion against the Crown and the maintenance of white supremacy, and without taking any sides amongst the African parties, without being accused of representing the patriotic front. This is the sharp, clear distinction which can and to us must be made.
Well, I'm very grateful to have the noble Lord's views. My view was very clear that he gave the impression of it, and that was the impression which is in my mind, and I'll read his speech tomorrow in Hansard and see whether that in any way changes the very clear impression I have at the present moment.
Well, my lords, I don't want to intervene in this, but I did listen carefully to the words of the noble lord and my noble friend and previous colleague, Lord Alport. I thought myself he'd put the matter so extremely well that there was very little else for anyone to say. And I thought, with respect to Lady Gaitskell, the noble Lady Baroness Gaitskell, he did have his own reservations and doubts, as all of us had, because indeed we're discussing this bill at a moment of twilight when none of us quite know what the dawn will bring. Each of us can have his hopes and his fears, and we've heard both expressed this evening. But it's futile, I think, at this stage to indulge our fancies, certainly dangerous to prophesy, and quite odious on my part to attempt to offer any advice. So rather than deal with the present doubts and difficulties, I prefer to take a rather broader perspective. I, myself, as advisor for the last 7 years of my government service, to successive governments and ministers on the problem of Rhodesia, and I feel I should be lacking in a sense of history and in the fitness of things if I didn't add a brief comment, at least this evening. From 1962 until my retirement, we were striving first to avoid any declaration of independence, and secondly, to end it. But as everyone knows, we failed. And no doubt many mistakes were made during that time. Perhaps most of all, the overemphasis laid on the effectiveness of sanctions. And so for 14 dreary years, the struggle went on, with occasional gleams of light from time to time, but no solution in sight, and certainly no prospect of Britain exercising responsibility. Now, I'm sure the Foreign Secretary would be the first to admit that circumstances have changed this year and new situations have been opened up, particularly ever since the Smith regime recognized first the principle of majority rule and then agreed to its being put into practice. Nevertheless, I think it is to the eternal credit of the Foreign Secretary, his colleagues in the government and the officials who advised him that this opportunity was seized, the initiative was taken, and with a mixture of firmness and flexibility, of patience and determination, a careful calculation of the risks, but a readiness to run them, the Foreign Secretary did bring matters, if not to a total conclusion, at least very nearly there at this moment. Of course, we're still in medias res, and all of us must accept that there are bound to be arguments and difficulties and possibly conflicts on the spot. There may well be incidents. All this emphasizes, I think, the challenge to the noble Lord Soames, underlines his courage in undertaking the job, and emphasizes the need for him to show the same degree of nerve and character that Lord Carrington has shown in the negotiations. Nevertheless, I think this is a tremendous achievement by the government. They have, as the noble Lord Alport was saying, they have achieved something that has eluded all their predecessors. They have established the authority of the British government in Rhodesia. And I say advisedly the word established, because it has never been established in this form before. After 1890, it was the British South African Company. After 1923, it was the self-governing colony of Rhodesia. After 1965, admittedly, powers were taken in this House to assert the sovereignty of Britain, but they were never properly exercised on the spot. And so now, for the first time, you do have a British responsibility, a British power, a British crown in control. And so this, in itself, is a historic moment. And secondly, of course, they have achieved the return to legality, which is the essential condition for international recognition of independence. And so Rhodesia is being set on a new path, and it's now up to the Rhodesians themselves to settle what future they want to have. Only they can do it. We can provide the conditions, we can advise, we can do a variety of things, but in the last resort, it must be up to the Rhodesians themselves to decide, and in this way we shall be fulfilling the vital fifth principle which undertook that the form of government would be one that was acceptable to all Rhodesians. And so, after so many years of disappointment and frustration, Britain, I think, can again hold her head high and feel that she can withdraw from what is now her last major colonial responsibility with dignity and with honour. But I say this not only in selfish self-satisfaction or the achievement of a moral principle. I think, as the noble lord on the woolsack was implying, there are other great consequences at stake too. It can bring peace and stability to Rhodesia, which has been so unhappy for so many years. It can end the bitterness and the argument that there's been in this country and throughout the Commonwealth with all the stirrings of racial confrontation that has brought about. And above all, in my view, it can point the way to racial harmony in Central Africa and lead to a relaxation of tension and renewal of energies in countries like Tanzania, Zambia, Botswana, and others. And perhaps finally, my lords, who knows, may drive home a lesson which may be heeded in South Africa in years to come with tremendous consequences for the peace and stability of us all.
My lords, it's not my purpose to detain your lordships very long, and my task is made easier because I find myself in wholehearted agreement with the noble Lord Alport's description of the events of the last 14 years. Tragic, unnecessary, potentially disastrous. However, he didn't ask himself the question, and don't blame him for that, but I'm going to provide my answer to the question which I think he should have asked. Why was it in 1965 that Mr. Ian Smith decided to embark on this disastrous course of action, disastrous even for the interest which he represented? The reasons, to my mind, are twofold. The first is the action that was taken by a Conservative administration before 1964. I don't know whether it was the time when noble Lord Alport was himself a minister, to supply Rhodesia with the hunters and the cameras and the vampires, which made it quite impossible for this country to take effective military action without clearly establishing air support. That opportunity, the opportunity to take the necessary action, was denied to us by Mr. Nyerere, who refused to allow us to station the necessary Air Force squadrons in Tanzania. But there was a second reason. The second reason, of course, is that Mr. Smith got a blank check from South Africa. He would never have proclaimed UBI without the certainty of the superiority of his air forces, plus the support of South Africa underwriting the commitment, political and economic commitment, into which he has entered. Now, my quarrel, if I may put it that way, my difference with the government, that those two conditions still operate today. The first need not operate, because today, Britain, now that there is a British governor, has the capacity, so if it so desires, to put effective air forces into Rhodesia, which would take out the Rhodesian Air Force and, if necessary, take on South Africa. And this is my question I want to put to the Minister. If the Minister would be kind enough to answer a question that was put to him by the noble Lord Hatch, and was put to the government in another place in which was not answered. If the Minister will tell the House whether the government have made protests or demands on South Africa to withdraw the forces which they've infiltrated into Mozambique, into Zambia, and from Rhodesia itself, I would be entirely satisfied. And I believe at the same time, if that answer is given and is satisfactory, I believe that then any opposition by the Patriotic Front to the ceasefire would vanish.
I go a little further. I want to particularize this. It isn't merely knowledge of the ground forces. I want to know whether the Pumas, piloted by South African pilots, South African officers, and the Bells, particularly, which came originally from Israel, whether they're still there and whether they're going to remain there. Because if they're there, and the Patriotic Front then gives the map references, which will be well known to everybody, then at any point, should negotiations break down in a matter of minutes, those concentration areas could be taken out. After all, we have to remember that the Patriotic Front has no air cover, none at all. Whereas the Rhodesian Air Force, based upon the South African commitment, can travel in minutes. Distances that would have to take days, if not weeks, to be covered in the height of the rainy season. And without that condition, it seems to me that the Patriotic Front is putting itself in a position of extreme danger. And indeed, this country is putting itself in danger too, for this reason. The outcome of what happens by Lord Soames' mission, and goodness knows I wish him well, depends not only on what the elections, but what the rest of the world in general, and what Africa thinks about them as well. And if in actual fact those elections are held in such a way, and the period afterwards is to demonstrate that despite all the fine words, the great speech of the Lord Chancellor, and the sincere words of the noble Lord Alport, despite all that, if at the end of the day it's demonstrated that South Africa has paid the piper and has called the tune, it isn't only South Africa and Rhodesia that will suffer. Our reputation will be sink to rock bottom. And that's disastrous, because for Britain, the days of power are over. I'd always hoped the days of influence would begin. But there can be no influence if we haven't played fair over this one. And I'm not absolutely sure that we have. I'd like to think that we've played fair, but the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating. I won't detain your lordships any longer. Where this bill today is a blank cheque. The government refuses to accept the affirmative order. I think they're unwise. I think they're unwise. I think it would be a gesture of goodwill and of good intent, but they would be well, for political reasons, to accept. If they refuse, again, the responsibility rests firmly on their shoulders. But it isn't only on their shoulders, it's the reputation of this country, about which we all must be concerned.
My Lords, before I proceed to say what I would like to develop in my speech this evening, I'd like to make some comment on some of the speeches which have gone before me. My Lords, I was in Rhodesia, as I said in the debate on the Southern Rhodesian Bill, during the Lancaster House Conference. I met and talked with a number of black Africans in Victoria Falls and Bulawayo and in Salisbury itself. I visited the security forces and members of the public service, and in all the conversations I had with them, there was one abiding desire which all of them seemed to want, and that was a peace for the country. The peace they seemed to want, they didn't seem to be too worried, or worried unduly, at what complexion might develop in respect of a government elected to power after the elections. I say that this evening, my Lords, because I wish to reduce possibly the tempo or the temperature from some of the speeches which have preceded mine. My Lords, the noble Lord Hatch of Lusby, in his comments on the appointment of my noble friend Lord Soames, the Governor of Rhodesia, implied that because he was a Conservative, he was incapable of exercising a dispassionate consideration of many of the tremendous problems with which he will be faced when he has been in office for a few months before he hands over to an independent government. My Lords, I objected to that statement by the noble Lord. I felt that it was impugning the honour of the noble Lord, which stands particularly high in the services he's rendered in a dispassionate sense in the interest of this country in many of the great appointments he has held overseas and in Britain. The other point I would like to say, my Lords, in respect of some of the comments of the noble Lord Hatch, it seems to me that he impugns the whole of the policy or the past colonial policies of Britain in the exercise of its powers when they had a colonial empire. This rubs off on me particularly because for the whole of my life I have given effect to those policies, those colonial policies overseas, as I've said on rather too many occasions in your Lordship's House. Many books are written now, which I deplore, are being circulated in the schools of Africa, which give a very similar account of what the noble Lord Hatch has said about our past policies, going back, as he desired to indicate, over 90 years. My Lords, when I was at the Victoria Falls in Rhodesia, I was shown propaganda which was printed by the other side, or emanating from the Patriotic Front, which was captured by the security forces a week before my visit. It seemed to me that very similar arguments which the noble Lord Hatch deploys in your Lordship's House were used in this communist propaganda by the forces who were then on the other side of the boundaries of Rhodesia. But, my Lords, this kind of argument deployed about our past policies is being used everywhere by every terrorist throughout the world who wishes us harm. And I deplore it, and I feel it is about time that a true account was given of the honourable way in which we've acted over many years in many parts of the world.
If he describes the members of the Patriotic Front and other similar people as communists and terrorists, could he tell the House how he describes those who supported and fought for Ian Smith after he had broken his oath of allegiance to the Queen?
My Lords, I have discussed that very point with many of the civil servants of Rhodesia, and I would say this, that perhaps what is not known in this country, and it should be known a little more clearly, is that public servants of a country or of any administration are bound to give their loyalty and their support to any government in power. They do not strike, and they never have struck in the defence of any agreement with that policy. They're not allowed to have a policy at all. They merely have to serve the government in power. And the government of Rhodesia, I'm not defending UDI. Many of the public servants that I spoke to disagreed with UDI. Many of the people in Rhodesia disagreed with UDI. They were faced with a fait accompli. They had no alternative but to go on and do their duty in support of somebody with whom they may have violently disagreed. My Lords, this bill and the southern-rhodesia-constitution-interim provisions, Order 1979, gives power to my noble friend Lord Soames, the newly appointed governor of Rhodesia, who we've all wished well, and other noble lords have wished him well this evening, to act as governor over various matters, one of which deals with the administration. And it is in respect of the administration which I'm now making my comments. My Lords, I shall be very brief, but I want to ask one question in regard to the public services of Rhodesia and their relationship with the governor. I would ask this question of my noble friend Lord Trefgarne, and I would like a considered answer. My Lords, at the present time, in every respect, the Zimbabwe Bill and these interim provisions gives power to a governor lawfully appointed by a British government to govern. In every other territory in which Britain had a constitutional appointed governor hitherto, Britain, through her governor, and as soon as independence was finalised, Britain entered into a public officers' agreement signed between Her Majesty's government and the incoming independent government. The object of this, my Lords, was to safeguard the terms of service and pensions of public servants, and I would like to be assured that this procedure is being followed or will be followed in due course in the case of Rhodesia. And in that connection, I would emphasise there are many black and white public servants who would be involved. I would also emphasise to my noble friend Lord Trefgarne that the Public Officers Agreement lays at the door of the independent government full responsibility for the pensions. But if the Public Officers Agreement was omitted in the Rhodesian context, and I can't see any reference to this in any of the documents for which we are considering this afternoon, if it was omitted, then it would be the one exception of all other colonies granted independence by Her Majesty's government. My other point is this, my Lords, and it is largely a request to the press and commentators outside your Lordship's house, who by what they write and say, probably unwittingly, and only on some occasions in the Rhodesian context, they seem to give succour to those who would seek to make difficulties for my noble friend the Foreign Secretary and Lord Soames in the peace both of them desire for Rhodesia. And my Lords, in this connection, I refer to a leader in the Times of September the 6th on the difficulties that would face the Governor when he assumed duty in Salisbury. The Times wrote, in reference to the civil service, that the Governor would be facing an administrative apparatus of a state which for 14 years has been in rebellion against the Crown and is inspired by hatred and contempt for the British government. My Lords, that is simply not true. Note, my Lords, the date September the 6th when the Times published this. And it was after I reported to your Lordships earlier on the 13th of November in the debate on the Southern-Rhodesian Bill, and in that context, about my travels in Rhodesia, where I found nothing but the highest traditions of public service anywhere, and where I was to discover, and this is important, that in September 1978, over a year ago, and a year before my visit, a resolution was passed by civil servants who pledged to serve any government elected to power, and in this interim period they have pledged to serve Lord Soames as loyally as they have served other governments in former days. My Lords, I said a great deal of this in your Lordship's house on September the 6th, but even so the Times refers 6 days later to the hatred and contempt of this administrative apparatus, a state inspired by hatred and contempt for the British government. My Lords, it is absolute nonsense. My Lords, it would be better for all concerned if the press in general took a little more notice of what was said in your Lordship's house. And in cases what they publish as their opinion, and what commentators speak and say in this connection, for the difficulties which they cause, which may be caused ahead when a ceasefire is considered. And after a ceasefire it has been achieved, for the problems which lay ahead may be very formidable indeed. And it's only too easy for those who on occasion seek no other interests but their own will seize any criticism for their own ends in order to detract from the devoted courage, ability and character of my noble friend the Foreign Secretary in his efforts to secure peace for Rhodesia.
My Lords, with your leave, I wish to support most warmly, if shortly, the most important point made by the noble Lord Goronwy-Roberts, namely that it is of vital importance that broadcasting in Zimbabwe, particularly during the interregnum period, be both fair and seen to be fair. That, other than Rhodesia, only Russia, Ethiopia, and Radio Cairo broadcast in the two major vernacular languages of Shona and Matabele is not only sad but very dangerous. The BBC Overseas Services, among others of course, broadcast in English to Africa as a whole. However, only 2 people out of 7 at most speak English in Rhodesia. Arising out of this, may I ask the Minister whether Her Majesty's Government have any plans for using the unique experience of the BBC's African services to assist the Rhodesian Broadcasting Service to maintain and even strengthen the impartiality of broadcasting, particularly in the tongues of Shona and Matabele, and especially during the interregnum period.
My Lords, the bill which the Government submit for your Lordship's approval tonight is the last major legislative step we have to take before we lay down our final direct responsibility in Africa. Our withdrawal from that continent has on the whole, I think, been achieved with dignity and justice. The efforts which successive British governments have made to solve this most intractable of problems by persuasion and negotiation are perhaps best illustrated if I recall that your Lordships have held no less than 49 major debates and listened to 61 statements on the subject since UDI. Indeed, I venture to suggest that in terms of ministerial effort, this problem has taken more time to resolve than the independence of Australia, Canada, India, and New Zealand taken together. The lengths to which this administration have gone and the Herculean labours of my noble friend, the Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary, are a matter of public record. Now, after 3.5 months, the conference at Lancaster House has concluded its work. The Salisbury delegation have accepted and initialled the documents, the contents of which are seen by world opinion to be entirely reasonable. All the main concerns of the Patriotic Front have been met. With the Governor in Salisbury, all the agreements reached can be implemented without delay. We very much hope that the Patriotic Front will participate in the forthcoming election. My noble and learned friend, the Lord Chancellor, has described the final efforts which the Government have made to deal with their concerns. There is now no genuine obstacle to prevent them from initialling the agreements. But we cannot hold up Rhodesia's progress indefinitely. The Government have always made it clear, and I repeat tonight, that no party can have a veto. My noble and learned friend has described the achievements of the conference and the reasons behind the main thrust of our policy with his usual clarity when he opened the debate. But perhaps your Lordships will allow me to deal with some of the narrower points which have been raised. I understand the concern of many noble lords about the decision to take direct responsibility for Rhodesia in the pre-independence period. There is no doubt that it will be a difficult time, and I believe we are fortunate to be able to call upon the services of my noble friend Lord Soames for this demanding task. And may I say at this point that I quite reject the suggestions and criticisms put by the noble Lord Hatch when he suggested that my noble friend was less than suitable for the task. It is important, of course, to emphasise the precise nature of that task, The Governor has full powers, but they are for a specific purpose and a short time. His main duty is to organise and conduct fair elections and provide an impartial administration of the country in the meantime. His responsibility does not extend further. Several of your lordships have asked how we will ensure that the election is free and fair, and by implication what we would do if the Commonwealth observers report unfavourably. My lords, the world has long recognised that the resolution of this matter is a British responsibility, and that of course includes ensuring that the elections are properly conducted. In the discharge of that responsibility, we have appointed the Governor, together with a substantial staff, specifically to supervise the elections. We greatly welcome the expected presence of the Commonwealth observers, and we shall do what we can to facilitate their task. But Rhodesia's prospects of international recognition and acceptance depend very much upon the elections being seen to be fair. This will be an important incentive, but at the end of the day, the final decision will be ours. Noble Lord Goronwy-Roberts asked whether the government were considering the problems of reconstruction in Rhodesia. I can assure him that the government will be ready to make development aid and technical assistance available to an independent Zimbabwe within the limits of our resources. In particular, as we have said at the conference, we shall be prepared to provide assistance for agricultural development and land resettlement schemes. We shall also do all we can to support the independent government in obtaining assistance from other donors. We are considering urgently what possibility there might be of obtaining for Rhodesia some preferential access to EEC markets during the interim. My lords, we're also conscious of the heavy toll that continuing Rhodesian conflict has exacted on all the neighbouring states, particularly Zambia. We have made it clear that once the ceasefire has been agreed, we shall wish to play our part in assisting Zambia to restore her infrastructure. My lords, I see that the noble Lord Goronwy-Roberts is not in his place, but it may perhaps be convenient for your lordships if I do nonetheless deal with some of the points that he raised, because they were of interest to several noble lords.
I'm sure the noble lord didn't intend any discourtesy, but as the House will realise, we are 2 speakers short, and I hope you'll be here any moment.
My lords, I quite accept that, of course, and I think you probably would be if I now move to deal with the points raised by the noble Lord Goronwy-Roberts as they are of interest to several other noble lords. The noble lord, in fact, here he is, raised several points about the administration of Rhodesia under the Governor. I think, however, his expectations may be a little too great. My noble friend has been in Rhodesia for only 5 days, and although he is certainly giving urgent attention to the issues raised by the noble lord, I'm afraid they cannot all be resolved immediately. Now, the noble lord also raised the question of access to the media, and this was echoed by my noble friend, Lord Morris. The document on pre-independence arrangements agreed at the Constitutional Conference establishes the right of all parties to have free access to the media, as well as the freedom to publish and advertise political views. It will be important to ensure that the Zimbabwe Rhodesia Broadcasting Corporation is genuinely impartial in its coverage of political activities, and the Governor's instructions specifically cover this point. I understand that those members of the corporation who are standing for political office have agreed to vacate their posts, and I can also inform your lordships that the ZRBC has agreed to take the BBC overseas service for its first news broadcast every morning. The noble lord also inquired about detainees and suggested, if I heard him correctly, that there were 18,000 detainees. I know of no basis for this figure, which I must say is very much in excess to the figure available to us. The documents agreed at the conference call on all parties to release persons detained arbitrarily and on political grounds, and the Governor will take steps to ensure that this happens. I hope that persons detained outside Rhodesia by or at the request of the Patriotic Front will also be released. The Governor will also be ordering a review of the cases of all persons detained. The noble lord asked me again about refugees. A start will be made during the period of the Governor's rule on the resettlement of refugees. and contacts have started with international...
That point is, it's not suggested that prisoners of war should be released before the war is over, is it?
My Lords, neither side claims to hold any prisoners of war at the present time, but the Governor will certainly be reviewing, as I've said, the cases of those detained, at least those cases to which he has access. My Lords, but to continue on the question of the refugees, it is a sizable problem, and I can only say say to your Lordships that I'm confident that the Governor will use his very best efforts to deal with it. On the question of the shipments of maize, we are taking the necessary steps to lift the ban on maize shipments, but there are a number of administrative arrangements that have to be made, and these may take a few days. My Lords, the other important issue which the noble Lord Goronwy-Roberts raised was the question of the parliamentary procedure on the order granting the setting out the Day of Independence. All the major issues at the Constitutional Conference have been resolved, and we think that the House and your Lordships should form its judgment now on whether the conditions for independence have been established. In the Government's view, they have. The issue of majority rule, which has been at the root of the conflict in Rhodesia, has been settled by the Independence Constitution. With the appointment of a British governor, the territory has returned to legal status. It's been agreed that elections should be held, supervised under the British government's authority. We have achieved agreement on these points at the Constitutional Conference, and there's nothing further which the government intend to ask of the parties to the conference. We believe, therefore, that we're fully justified in asking the House to decide upon the issue of independence now. My Lords, perhaps I could now turn to some of the points raised by the noble Lord Hatch. The noble Lord repeated a number of issues which were agreed by all the parties at the conference, and I don't think I'm going to reopen the discussions that took place at Lancaster House tonight. But the noble Lord also asked why the ban on political parties was being maintained. It has been made clear to the parties concerned that the ban will be lifted as soon as the ceasefire agreement is signed. Thereafter, all parties will be able to take part in the election campaign, provided, of course, that they campaign peacefully. The noble Lord Hatch, also asked why martial law had not been lifted. The document agreed by all the parties at the conference on the pre-independence arrangements says that in the event of an effective ceasefire, the need for martial law will disappear. And that's certainly our position. The noble Lord asked about the South African forces. I think this was raised by the noble Lord Goronwy-Roberts as well. My noble friend, the Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary, has told your Lordships that we envisage that no external military intervention in Rhodesia under a British governor. The governments concerned are aware of our views, and we are quite sure that they will comply.
But in more specific terms, I wanted to know when I asked the noble Lord whether the government have made specific requests to the South African government to withdraw the forces that they have infiltrated into Mozambique and into Zambia, and whether they have withdrawn, particularly the Pumas and the South African pilots who've been operating them.
My Lords, I think I'd be wise to consider the implications of that question before I answer it, certainly in public. I will, however, consider it and write to the noble Lord. My Lords, all the major issues of the Constitutional Conference are now resolved.
Continuing with the same point, because you really haven't answered the point that either my noble friend Lord Whig made or the one that I asked you. I quoted specifically from the Under-Secretary in the debate in another place last week, when he said, during the independence period, and after the presence, therefore, of the governor in Salisbury, there can be and will be no foreign involvement. Well, the governor's in Salisbury. Are the South African forces still within the frontiers of Rhodesia?
There are certainly no units of the South African forces in Rhodesia, but there are individuals of various nationalities serving in the Rhodesia Armed Forces. but the only forces in Rhodesia in this period will be the Rhodesian Armed Forces and the Patriotic Front Forces. We have made clear in the conference and elsewhere that we do not contemplate any kind of purge of the personnel of the forces of either side. My Lords, as I was saying, all the major issues of the Constitutional Conference are now resolved. We have gone to the limits to reach agreement, and we sincerely believe that the documents now awaiting signature constitute a settlement which is fair to all parties. As my noble and learned friend has said, the achievements of the conference have been remarkable. It remains only to put a settlement into effect, and that we are poised to do. The government hope that the Patriotic Front will sign the agreements very shortly, and thus put the final seal on all that has been achieved at this conference. My Lords, the government have now embarked upon an irreversible process to bring Rhodesia to independence. The first step of this last phase was to install the governor in Salisbury. We cannot and will not impose new conditions. The conditions for independence have been fulfilled in the agreements reached at Lancaster House. They will now be carried out. We can no longer deny to the people of Rhodesia their right to take their place in the world as a free and independent Zimbabwe. The choice now facing the Patriotic Front is a simple one. They can, on the one hand, sign the agreements now on the table. They will have a fair chance to put their support to the test in elections held under our authority. These agreements, in the government's considered opinion, constitute a settlement fair and reasonable to all the parties, and give to the Patriotic Front a splendid opportunity to submit themselves and their policies to the approval of the Rhodesian people. If they take that course, and we do not underestimate the political courage required of them to do so, then Rhodesia can move swiftly to independence in a spirit of reconciliation and national unity. The people of Zimbabwe will then have the chance they surely deserve to live in peace and increasing prosperity, surrounded by friends and allies. Alternatively, if they allow the negotiations to founder, after all that has been achieved, they will bear a heavy responsibility. I repeat that it is our hope and our expectation that they will agree, and it is the clear duty of Her Majesty's Government to keep Rhodesia moving ahead and on course for independence in the near future. That duty is wholly binding upon us and will be discharged within a matter of weeks. This bill enables us to do just that. I beg to move.
Lords, before the noble Lord sits down, there is one point which my noble friend Lord Goronwy-Roberts raised, which I think the whole House would like an answer, and that's the point about Zambia. He did ask whether it were true, it's very difficult to get the information from that part of the world, whether it were true that traffic has now been normalised between Rhodesia and Zambia, as we thought it would be as soon as the governor got there. Zambia is in fact starving. They have no maize. They're desperately in need of salt. As far as we know, those goods are being held up in Rhodesia, and we should like to know whether the governor is taking prompt action to deal with that.
I'm sure the noble Baroness and the House that the governor is taking steps to get maize moving into Zambia just as quickly as possible. The noble Baroness may also recall that I answered a question in the House a week or so ago about maize being provided by the British government from another source, and that is also moving into Zambia.
Very briefly and very quickly, would he, if he can't give me the answer about the public officers agreement, would he write to me? I did raise that question.
Yes, my lords. The noble lord, my noble friend, asked for a considered reply. I will do just that, consider the matter and write to him.
My lords, the question is that the said bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Amen. To the contrary, not content. The contents have it.
My lords, I beg to move that the House do now resolve itself into a committee upon the bill.
The question is that the House do now resolve itself into a committee upon the said bill. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Amen. To the contrary, not content. The contents have it.
Zimbabwe Bill, committee stage. Question is the title be postponed. As many as that bid and say content. Contents have it. There are no amendments. The question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. Lord Llewelyn-Davies.
My Lords, we on this side have tried throughout these very complicated debates and discussions always to be constructive and not obstructive. We have warned the government when we felt they were taking risks which perhaps could not be justified. We've always been clear about that. But we have tried, I'm sure noble lords opposite will agree with us, we have tried to be constructive. And we did not put down an amendment at this stage, though we were very tempted to do so. Because there's no question that feeling in another place and in this House is very strong about the whole question of the date of independence merely being laid before Parliament, but not being given an affirmative resolution by both Houses. I must say that on this side we were disappointed with the noble Lord Trefgarne's reply to this. He himself said that it was a British responsibility, that the whole world recognised it as such. We feel that under those conditions it ought to be seen to be approved by the British Parliament, both houses of the British Parliament. We can't indeed form a view about whether the conditions for independence are fulfilled until after the elections have taken place. My noble friend Lord Goronwy-Roberts pleaded with the noble lord that if he couldn't give way completely on the affirmative orders, would he not agree that there should be a report to Parliament after the elections and before the date for the Independence Bill the order is laid. I know it's the 13th hour, as the noble Lord Alport said, but we feel very deeply about this. We're profoundly disappointed that the government couldn't respond in another place, and we ask him even now to say that he will consider, if not the complete affirmative resolution, at least a report.
I'd just like to associate us, my friends on these benches, wholeheartedly with what the noble Baroness has said. We voted for this amendment in the other place, and of course we should like very much that the government would, to some extent anyhow, revise their view.
My Lord, in full support of my noble friend, Lady Llewelyn-Davies, may I draw the attention of the House to the issues that are involved in this question of simply whether or not the order in council will be subject to debate by Parliament before it is carried into effect. That is the nub of the question. And I do believe that we have a parliamentary responsibility in this matter, a parliamentary responsibility to ensure that the conditions have been fulfilled in which Parliament would wish to grant independence. I do not accept the argument of the noble Lord the Minister when he says that all the conditions have been fulfilled for the granting of independence. They have not. They cannot have been. Otherwise, why are we inviting Commonwealth observers, probably international observers, certainly observers from this country, to go and see whether the elections are held in a free and fair manner? What is the point of doing that? If in fact, if they report that they have not been held in a free and fair manner, there is nothing we can do about it. What we are being asked to do by the government is to give them a blank check. Now, this has never been done before in these circumstances. There has never been an occasion on which independence has been granted to a colony when there was a civil war taking place, and that civil war is taking place right now. It has not come to an end. Never before in the history of British decolonization has independence been granted without there being both stability and peace. I believe that the noble and learned Lord, now sitting on the front bench, will understand the point when I say that to some extent This agreement has had to be reached by balancing justice and peace. And we have had to diminish to a slight extent the justice that is meted out in order to obtain peace. But what we cannot do is simply to say to the government, whatever happens between now and sometime in March, they have the right to grant independence to Rhodesia. What is more, my lord, is this not unfair to the governor, Lord Soames?
Well, I don't think we're questioning the right of the government to grant independence, are we? Surely this bill gives the government the right to grant independence. We're simply talking about the day on which we do it.
I very much regret that there is not the same amendment down in this House as there was in the other place. That would then perhaps have made it clear to the noble Lord the Minister that what we are challenging is not the right of the government to grant independence, but the right of the government to grant independence without coming back to this Parliament, to both houses of this Parliament, with the reports of the Commonwealth observers, with the observations of the governor himself, instead of putting all the onus, the intolerable onus, on the governor, who may very well be in an extremely difficult situation after the election in deciding who he should call upon to be Prime Minister. And surely it is a parliamentary responsibility, surely it means something that this Parliament is granting independence. The government, all governments have always said only the British Parliament can grant independence. Then the British government has got the responsibility, before it grants independence, of ensuring that the circumstances that are commensurate with independence have been fulfilled. They have not been fulfilled yet. The minister just can't get away with this. They cannot have been fulfilled yet. They've been fulfilled after the elections have taken place and after the elections have been seen to be free and fair, and after there is a situation in which a government can take over all the responsibilities of independence. And what we are asking, we haven't got an amendment, so we can't divide on this, but what we're asking the government to say is, yes, we will come back when we table the order in council. We will come back to Parliament. We will report to Parliament the circumstances that have taken place between now and that date. It is virtually no delay at all. As we all hope, if things have gone well, it will be simply a matter of days and it will go straight through the House. But that right should remain in Parliament until Parliament is satisfied that the circumstances have been created in which it is right and fair and just to grant independence, rather than putting the onus on the governor. This is where the responsibility lies. The responsibility for what happens after independence will still lie in those circumstances here, and I beg the minister to assure or to give some promise to this House that when the order in council is tabled, it is brought to both houses of Parliament so that it can be debated before it is carried into effect.
My Lord, we've just listened to what I would call a quibbling argument, and a dangerously quibbling argument at that. It's Parliament that is granting independence. That's what this bill is all about. Nobody but the two houses of Parliament have given the authority for this independence to be granted under terms which Parliament has shown themselves to be satisfied. Now, the actual date on which the formalities are completed is a matter that, of course, must be at the judgment of the government of the day. And the reason that I say that the argument we've just heard is a dangerous, quibbling argument is this. It reflects a lack of confidence in this House as to the good intentions and the the sense of the government when they come to whatever decision as regards the date that they will eventually have to come to. And if it is that we reflect that lack of confidence here, aren't we adding fuel to people who, for reasons quite different from what may be here, have also shown a lack of confidence in what will eventually be the decision? If on this matter we can't be unanimous in allowing the government today, with the special knowledge that only the government of the day can have, as to the date, the time, the hour in which the final move is made, then I believe that we are setting an atmosphere which could be dangerous. We know that if it is that for some special circumstances the conditions were completely changed, if it is that we knew that something unforeseen did happen, we know that we have got a government that would take that into account. We know that we've got a government who would wish to share with Parliament any new circumstances which may arise. If that isn't the confidence that this House can reflect, then we mustn't be surprised if it undermines the advance that's been made in other quarters where the friendliness doesn't exist like this.
Well, Lord, agree. But it's not a question of having confidence in this government. It's possible you might have to have confidence in another government.
But all that the noble lord is asking for is that this government that is presenting this bill should not be allowed, if circumstances remain which in their judgment are the right circumstances, to make the final decision. Let's not quibble, and let's not at this stage be dangerously quibbling in the way we approach this great move forward.
May I ask the noble lord this question? We have heard repeatedly this evening from the government front bench that this process to which the House is asked to agree is irreversible.
Yeah.
Now, in the light of that definition of what they're doing in the name of this country and for Rhodesia, we have suggested that the mechanism of the affirmative resolution should be adopted. It will not delay the order by more than a couple of days. Or failing that, and this is a great concession from us, that a report, either from the Commonwealth Monitoring Force or some other impartial source, as to how the elections have gone, showing we very much hope, and I very much expect, that the prerequisite condition for independence, namely a properly conducted, free and fair election, has in fact taken place. Now, I cannot understand why the government, A, refuses the affirmative resolution procedure, and secondly, it seems unwilling to present a report to the House, which the House could look at and then say, this is all excellent, let the dates be announced today and we shall all agree to it.
My lords, I'm afraid I can't agree to either of the proposals put to me by the noble lord.
Great mistake.
First, as my noble and learned friend stressed in his second reading speech, the government have asked both sides at the Constitutional Conference to make concessions. They have agreed to our proposals on the understanding that, provided they fulfil the agreed conditions, independence will be forthcoming. The Rhodesian Parliament has been dissolved, and Bishop Massereene and his colleagues are standing aside in the belief that an irreversible process is being engaged leading to independence. Secondly, if a further parliamentary stage were added, it could, I emphasize could mean that the government was taking on an open-ended commitment in Rhodesia. The purpose of assuming legislative and executive authority in Rhodesia is to allow elections to be held in which all parties can participate and independence to be granted on whatever government emerges. This is a finite process, and the government cannot accept the possibility that it could be extended. If we allow the affirmative resolution procedure, of course, Parliament might produce a negative resolution, and that would be, we think, against the undertakings that we have given. The government recognise that the majority of independent bills set a date for independence, but this is by no means always so. It was not done, for instance, in the case of independence for Ceylon, Cyprus, Malaya or Malta. In none of these cases was it judged appropriate to provide any parliamentary procedure for the orders setting the date of independence. I have already explained to the House the uncertainty over the precise date of elections and the exact length of time which it will take to complete the various stages after them. Although the government do not envisage any No, I won't, not at the moment. There will need to be consultation with the governor and with the parties, and it may be that the final date for independence is not set until a later stage in the process which I have described. The government must have reasonable flexibility in this matter.
Ask the noble lord, whilst taking in all that he has said quite sincerely, none of the governments that he cited had the problem of UDI. We were confronted with a completely different case. And we're asking, are we not attacking a government? It's Parliament that should make a decision.
Could I really make an appeal to the government from bench to concede this? I think my colleagues have been extremely reasonable. And, you know, an opposition has its rights, and we believe that what we're suggesting is positive and constructive.
The noble Lord Davies of Leek said that the position was unique in Rhodesia because of UDI. But UDI is at an end, my lords. Legality has returned to Rhodesia, and I'm afraid I can't accept the proposals that are put to us.
My lord, the noble Lord the Minister has really not answered the central question or made any response to the appeal that has been made by my noble lords on the front bench. May I quote to him a section of a paper which his government submitted to the Lancaster House Conference, paragraph 26 of which reads, "Finally, I am conscious of the concern on both sides about the situation which might arise after the elections. I have made it clear that if there is a general wish, the monitoring force would stay in Rhodesia until the independence government are formed and independence is granted." So the British government itself recognises that there is a danger of a situation arising after the elections in which the new regime might need to call upon the monitoring force. Now, surely it is sensible, it is only common sense, and it is only reasonable, and it is only good parliamentary practice, that if the British government recognises that that may be the situation, that they will say that they will come back to this House and say that and report to this House before they make the final decision on independence, which is now being taken. You're asking us to make that decision tonight in a vacuum. You've no idea what's going to happen in the next 3 months, nor have we. You're asking us to give you a blank check to say at the end of 3 months, whatever happens, independence is going to be granted because we've started an irreversible process. I suggest to the government that this would be, and might very well be in the future, extremely helpful to them themselves, as well as to the Rhodesians, and as well as to parliamentary practice.
And as that clause 1 stand part of the bill, as many as that been say content. Can't you not content? I think the contents have it. The contents have it. Clause 2, the question is clause 2 stand part of the bill. As many as that been say content. Clauses 3, 4, 5 and 6. The question is that these clauses stand part. Clause 3. The question is that clause 3 stand part of the bill.
I wanted to say, my lords, a few words about clause 3 because it seems quite apart from the Rhodesian issue. It is a matter of such constitutional importance. Were it not for without this clause, Ian Smith and some of his associates would be in danger of prosecution for treason and murder. This clause is exempting them from that. It is the use of the legislative power to override the ordinary rule of law. Now, for my part, I believe it's sensible and right to have this clause in the bill. I think most of my noble friends would agree with me. What surprises me a little is that members of the Conservative Party, with their intense, at times almost fanatical devotion to the rule of law, are so ready to see it set aside in this instance. I'm reminded of an episode in the last Parliament, in the last government, where a very modest measure was put forward to relieve certain councillors at Clay Cross from legal penalties they would otherwise have spent have suffered for being over-generous with ratepayers' money and not showing a strict regard for the law. When that measure was put through, language was used to suggest that we were tearing up civilization by the roots. And I did wonder at the time whether Conservative members who spoke in those terms had foreseen that the day would come when they would want a clause of this kind in this bill. I'm a little surprised, too, that certain members of the judiciary who expressed opinions about the handling of the Clay Cross case haven't had a word to say about this clause. And do we really take the view that overspending the ratepayers' money is unpardonable, but that treason and murder can be set aside, well, really so light-heartedly as we appear to be doing it? I do believe this is one of the occasions when it is right to do it, when of the two great principles of our Constitution, the sovereignty of Parliament and the rule of law, the sovereignty of Parliament should be allowed to override the rule of law and set aside the normal legal consequences. It merely seems to me, however, that this is an unusual thing to do at the very least, and that we ought to not let it pass entirely without comment.
My lords, no, go along. Go along.
A short observation to my noble friend. There is this difference between Rhodesia and Clay Cross. Rhodesia is within the jurisdiction of our government and within the realm of British law. Rhodesia is neither.
Well, I do think perhaps I ought to say this. There is another distinction. I've known the noble Lord Stuart of Fulham, is it, for a very, very long time, if you'll forgive me saying so. I think probably more than 50 years. But there is a further distinction which he appears to overlook. In Clay Cross, we were not endeavouring to put an end to a civil war. In this case, we are.
Question is that Clause 3 stand part of the bill. As many as that have been say content. Council not content, contents have it. Clause 4, the question is Clause 4 stand part of the bill. As many as that have been say content. Not contents have it. Clause 5. Question is Clause 5 stand part of the bill. As many as that have been say content. Not contents have it. Clause 6. Question is Clause 6 stand part of the bill. Many as that have been say content. Not contents have it. The schedules. That these be the three schedules to the bill, Schedules 1, 2, and 3. The question is that the schedules are part of the bill. As many as that have been say content. Not contents have it. The question is this be the title of the bill. Question is that as many as that have been say content. Not contents have it. The question is that I report the bill to the House without amendment. As many as that have been say content. Not contents have it. The question is that the House be resumed. Many as that have been say content. Contents have it. My Lords, the Committee of the whole House to whom the Zimbabwe Bill was committed have gone through the same and have directed me to report it to your Lordships without amendment.
My Lords, I beg to move that this report be now received.
My Lords, the question is that the said report be now received. As many as are of that opinion will say content. To the contrary, not content. The contents have it.
My Lords, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
Question is, the said bill be now read a third time. As many as are of that opinion will say content. To the contrary, not content. The contents have it.
My Lords, I beg to move that this bill do now pass.
Question is, the said bill do now pass. As many as are of that opinion will say content. To the contrary, not content. The contents have it.
Southern-Rhodesia-Constitution-Interim Provisions Order, 1979, Lord Garner.
Me again, I'm afraid, my Lords. The bill... My Lords, I beg to move that the Southern Rhodesia-Constitution-Interim Provisions Order 1979, a copy of which was laid before this House on the 4th of December, be approved. The order was made on the 3rd of December under powers contained in Section 3 of the Southern Rhodesia Act 1979. It's subject to affirmative resolution of both Houses within 28 days. Sections 1 and 3 of the order came into operation on the 4th of December. The remainder of the order was brought into effect on the 12th of December by a notice signed by my noble friend, the Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary. The purpose of the order, as its title indicates, is to make temporary provision for the government of Southern Rhodesia for the period between the Governor's arrival and the grant of independence, to which your Lordships have just agreed. It sets no time limit for this period, but as my noble friend the Lord Chancellor said, my noble and learned friend the Lord Chancellor said, we expect it to be in the order of 3 months. The terms in which it provides for the government of Rhodesia implement the agreement reached at the Constitutional Conference on the pre-independence arrangements. The order establishes the offices of Governor and Deputy Governor of Southern Rhodesia, which have been filled respectively by my noble friend Lord Soames and by Sir Anthony Duff, Deputy to the Permanent Under-Secretary in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, who's played a leading part in the negotiations at the Lancaster House Conference. The order confers full legislative powers in Southern Rhodesia on the Governor. He will be able to make laws by ordinance. He will also have the power to continue existing laws with such modifications as he thinks fit, and to validate transactions entered into during the period until the 11th of November, since the 11th of November 1965. The Governor's first ordinance, published on the day of his arrival, set out in greater detail how he will exercise his powers. A second ordinance has been published, which deals with the functions of the Election Commissioner and his staff and establishes the Election Council. In accordance with the arrangements agreed at the conference for the pre-independence elections, and copies of these ordinances have been placed in the library of the House. While the legislative power conferred upon the Governor is very extensive, my noble friend Lord Carrington has made clear at the Constitutional Conference that the power will not be used to make changes in Rhodesia which are properly the business of an elected government. This reassurance was repeated by the Governor in his first broadcast to the people of Rhodesia. The Governor's role will be to organise elections and maintain the administration of the country on a caretaker basis. The order also confers upon the Governor full executive authority in Southern Rhodesia and requires all officers and authorities in Rhodesia to obey his instructions. Bishop Muzorewa and his colleagues will not exercise ministerial powers during the Governor's period of office. This provision is crucial to the implementation of the pre-independence arrangements agreed at the Constitutional Conference. It will give the Governor the authority with which to ensure the impartial administration of the country during the elections and the implementation of the ceasefire. At the same time, it recognises that he will work through the existing administration and police. As your Lordships know, the Government have taken the view, and this has been accepted by the parties at Lancaster House, that there is no practical alternative in this brief period to using the existing services. It will be for the Government of Independent Zimbabwe to decide on the future structure of the services of the state. The order also vests in the Governor the prerogative of mercy. During the pre-independence period, no sentence of death can be carried out unless it be confirmed by the Governor. It would not be in accord with the policy of Her Majesty's Government that executions should take place. Finally, the order makes provision that the rights and liabilities of the Government of Southern Rhodesia, including the debts and liabilities incurred before UDI, remain enforceable. The reasons for appointing a Governor have been explained fully to your Lordships, and I shall not repeat them now. The constitutional responsibility for bringing Rhodesia to independence rests with Britain, and this order confers the powers which enable the Governor to carry out the responsibilities laid upon him under the agreements reached at the Constitutional Conference. I beg to move that the order be approved.
My Lords, the question is that the order laid before the House on the 4th of December 1979 be approved.
My Lords, when the noble Lord Trefgarne began his speech on this order and used, I think if I heard him correctly, the words, the bill, I thought for a moment that he was at last, after a splendid revelation on his part, going to make the concession which had been so vigorously sought on this side of this House and in another place as well. But, my Lords, as we've heard, that is, alas, not so. My Lords, I don't propose to detain the House long on this particular order. As we've heard from the noble Lord, Lord Trefgarne, and the House will be grateful to him for his explanation of the order, it gives power to the governor in Salisbury, extensive powers, and it's right, in our view, that he should be given all the necessary powers to govern the country, for, after all, the Salisbury Parliament itself has already dissolved itself last week. And last week, Rhodesia returned to the status of a colony. So it is, in our view, essential that the governor should be given these powers. Not only legislative powers, but also, as the Minister has explained, executive powers as well, which are indeed very wide in scale, and which include control over the armed forces, and also, a further point which the noble Lord mentioned in the course of his remarks, the governor's assumption of powers connected with the prerogative of mercy. And I'm sure that everyone, certainly my noble friends on these benches, will be pleased to hear the observation that he made concerning the question of the possibility of executions during this particular period. So, my Lords, all of those powers are very necessary. But I do think at the same time that it's necessary to make this point too, and that is that still, as yet, there is no ceasefire in that country. We all hope fervently that that will come, and will come soon. But I don't think, my Lords, if I may say so, that the House can escape the implications of any clash. We all hope it won't take place, but of any clash which could take place between the Rhodesian armed forces and the guerrilla forces, because there is no doubt at all that Britain itself would be involved directly, for the governor is, after all, as part of his functions explained by the noble Lord, Lord Trefgarne tonight, the Commander-in-Chief of the armed forces, exercising responsibilities of this country. Now, my Lords, I don't want to go over the implications of this again. They have been discussed quite extensively on other occasions, but I do feel nevertheless that it is right that Her Majesty's opposition should have pressed, as they did, for agreement for a ceasefire before the governor actually went. As the noble Lord, the Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary, Lord Carrington, said to your Lordships on the 7th of November, and again on the second reading of the Southern Rhodesia Bill, as it was then, on the 13th of November, the plan was for a ceasefire to be agreed before the governor was actually sent. He did, of course, on that second occasion, on the 13th of November, add a reservation which will be familiar to the House. I've no wish at all tonight, either on this or indeed on any other point, and we have made full and well-deserved comments about the success which the noble Lord, the Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary, has so far achieved. I've no wish to be critical of him on this or indeed on any other point, but I do feel that it is right with respect that the House must face the possible consequences of the sequence of events that was chosen. And of course, I would only add that we do also quite understand all the reasons and all the circumstances which led the government to decide to send the governor there last week. The only other point that I would make on this, my Lords, is this, that this particular example is not the first example which has confronted the House tonight in the course of our deliberations, where, in our view, the cart has been placed before the horse. I hope that there will be no difficulties arising as a result of the government's refusal and this is the other instance which we have had tonight, to accept the affirmative resolution procedure for an order in council on the date of independence following elections. It would be wrong of me, and indeed I would be out of order in doing so, were I to pursue that further tonight. But, my lords, I say that because it is not the only occasion when we have experienced the cart being placed before the horse in these matters tonight. My lords, it has been already said in the course of our debates on the bill itself that this exercise is something of a gamble. We all hope on these benches, as well as on the government benches, and indeed elsewhere, that there will be a complete agreement soon, that there will be a swift ceasefire, that Rhodesia will proceed to the remaining stages to independence with a minimum of trouble, and we hope with complete success. This is what I believe all of us desire with all our hearts for the sake of all of the people of Rhodesia.
Yeah. Well said. Well done. My lord, well done. May I ask the noble Lord, the Minister, one brief question in two parts. As I understand it, and perhaps you'll correct me if I'm wrong, this order gives power to the governor both to command the armed forces and to order the police force. Can he tell me whether the police force is now going to be separated from the combined operations, in other words, separated from the armed forces? That is the first part of the question. And secondly, will it be the police force or will it be the armed forces who are responsible and given command by the governor in the event of any ceasefire? I would understand if the noble lord has not got the answer ready. If not, perhaps he will write to me about it.
My lords, those are perfectly proper questions, which I confess I don't have the answer to at this moment, but I will find out the answer and write to the noble lord. I don't think your lordships would wish me to rehearse all the arguments we've been through this evening again. I hope your lordships will now agree to pass this order.
Question is that the order laid before the House on the 4th of December 1979 be approved. As many as are of that opinion will say content. To the contrary, not content. The contents have it.
My lords, I beg to move this House to now adjourn.
House to adjourn.